Imagine being an orphan struggling with life and then getting kidnapped at the age of 7. You would think, what could be worse? But that was just the beginning. The ones who kidnapped you were mad scientists who experimented on you, implanting minerals from the gate and monster cells inside you, slowly turning you into a chimera hunter. They forced you to fight monsters for 70 years, and when your body started to fall apart, they abandoned you in a dungeon to die. But little did they know, they had also implanted the power of an immortal monster within you. That power revived you and turned you human again. Well, this is the tragic story of our main character, who now stands at a crossroads with two paths ahead, one of revenge and the other of forgetting everything to live a normal life in the dungeon. If you guys think this story is good, then make sure to like and subscribe this channel. Then let's start. One day, a sudden tear appeared in the sky, forming a blazing red cross-shaped rift. Its edges crackled with energy, radiating an ominous glow as if the heavens themselves had been split apart. On that fateful day, everything began to change. From the ominous rift in the sky, a gate tore open, flooding the world with chaos. Swarms of monstrous insect-like creatures poured out, their wings beating furiously as they descended upon the earth. And with their arrival, destruction followed. From beyond the rift emerged a world that would later be known as the Demon Realm. From its depths, ferocious and merciless monsters poured into the human world, their presence bringing chaos and ruin wherever they went. In humanity's darkest hour, certain individuals awakened with extraordinary abilities. These chosen ones, known as hunters, rose to stand against the monstrous threat, wielding powers that defied ordinary limits. These hunters were individuals who had awakened to the power of mana, granting them extraordinary abilities that set them apart from ordinary humans. With the emergence of these empowered individuals, humanity finally found the strength to fight back, launching a counterattack against the monstrous invaders. As the years went by, the scars of war slowly began to fade. Cities rose once more from the rubble, rebuilt under the warm glow of a new dawn. Though countless challenges still lingered, life gradually found its rhythm again. At the very least, some people were able to reclaim and enjoy a semblance of normalcy. Peace was fragile. The threat was never truly gone, as monstrous creatures continued to emerge, forcing humanity to remain vigilant and ready for battle. To combat the relentless waves of monsters pouring into the world, warriors fought fiercely, determined to hold the line and protect humanity from annihilation. With a fierce cry, the warrior swung his weapon, striking at the monstrous abomination before him, its gaping maw lined with jagged fangs and filled with unblinking eyes. Every blow was a desperate attempt to keep the horrors at bay. Despite their bravery, there was a critical problem. The number of hunters who naturally awakened their powers was far too few to match the overwhelming tide of monsters. Thus, in response to this dire shortage, something new was created, a force born out of necessity to stand against the relentless threat. It was none other than artificial life, beings created by human hands, their glowing eyes and formidable presence signaling a new weapon in the fight for survival. This creation was known as the Chimera Hunter, a powerful artificial warrior, forged to annihilate monsters with unmatched precision and devastating force. The experiments utilized grim materials, corpses of death row inmates and animals, serving as the foundation for creating these artificial warriors. They also incorporated rare minerals harvested from deep within the gates, their otherworldly energy serving as a vital component in the creation process. Monster cells were added to the mix, infusing the creations with the power and ferocity of the very beasts they were designed to hunt. In a desperate bid for survival, humanity pushed the limits of science and morality, fusing the remains of beasts and humans within ominous laboratories to forge weapons capable of turning the tide. These advancements made it possible to mass-produce chimera hunters, ensuring a steady army of artificial warriors to confront the monstrous threat. This alliance was hailed as the perfect fusion of the scientific and hunter communities, combining intellect and combat prowess to create humanity's ultimate line of defense. This collaboration significantly reduced hunter mortality rates and saved countless lives, marking a turning point in humanity's battle for survival. Decades later, under the quiet of night, an illegal chimera research lab operated in secrecy. Inside, a weary worker sighed, muttering to himself that he only had one last subject to check before he could finally head home. In the B-18 high-grade chimera storage, two researchers moved cautiously down the dimly lit corridor. One of them stopped, shining his flashlight on a particular cell, number 17. "His arm looks a little rotten," he remarked with concern. One researcher shouted urgently, "Hey, don't go near him." The other, unfazed, replied calmly, "It's fine. His brain is damaged. He won't move without orders. A monstrous creature was chained to the ground, its body twisted and unnatural. Its right arm was grotesquely deformed, oozing with strange growths. One of the researchers shined a light on it and said, "His right arm is completely messed up. Could this be a side effect of the experiment?" One of the researchers scoffed and said, "Why are you so scared of a guy who can't even see properly?" But as he spoke, the creature's golden, slit-pupiled eyes suddenly snapped open. One of the researchers stammered, "Let's just roughly pass it. At this rate, he'll be discarded anyway." The other gave a casual nod and replied, "All right, man." The chained creature sat silently in the dimly lit cell, its piercing eyes locked on the two researchers. Neither spoke, the heavy atmosphere pressing down on them as the sound of chains subtly echoed in the air. Inside the lab director's office, a cold and detached voice declared, "Number 17 is now useless," sealing the creature's fate without a hint of remorse. One of the scientists reported, "His body is too badly damaged. If it were any other one, it would have died already." The lab director, seated behind his desk, responded coldly, "How much longer does it have?" One of the scientists replied, "A month at most." The other nodded in agreement, adding, "I agree." The man smirked slightly and said, "Deploy him in this gate blockade operation. Have him guard the rear when the hunters retreat." Under the dim, cold light, the chained beast lay battered and bloodied. Directors commanded researchers to do not input a return command. Far away, in the scorching skies of the Demon Realm's Rocky Mountain region, the ground cracked beneath a lone figure. Golden streaks of power burst through the air. From the red sky above, a massive golden-scaled beast dove with its jaws wide open, teeth glinting menacingly. Its roar shook the heavens as it descended upon the horned figure below. Number 17 braced himself, his clawed legs digging into the ground as golden energy swirled around him. Blood ran down his back, but his eyes were fierce. The golden beast lunged, but Number 17 swung his massive claw and ripped it apart in midair. Suddenly, the ground around him shattered violently as fiery projectiles rained down. Explosions filled the battlefield with smoke and fire, but Number 17 stood tall, his eyes fixed ahead. From the cracked earth, a monstrous plant-like beast erupted, roaring as venomous vines whipped outward. The ground shook, but the white-haired Number 17 didn't flinch. His massive, clawed limbs crushed the earth as his glowing eyes radiated killing intent. With a burst of power, he launched into the sky, leaving a blazing trail behind him. The plant beast recoiled in fear, but it was too late. Mid-air, Number 17 twisted and struck, his claws slicing the monster apart, chunks of red flesh raining down across the battlefield. Explosions shook the battlefield, debris flying everywhere. Number 17 opened its jaws wide, rows of sharp teeth gleaming as blue lightning sparked around them. In its mouth, a glowing sphere of energy formed, building up for a deadly attack. A flash of blue lightning blasted from its maw, shooting down like a spear of pure destruction. The beam struck its target directly, scorching everything in its way. The creature was swallowed in the blinding light, its body convulsing as it let out a terrible scream. Sparks crackled across its frame until it looked ready to tear apart from the inside. The battlefield lay in ruin, streaks of lightning still crackling in the air as the dust settled. The group stared at the lone figure ahead, their gazes filled with awe. "Amazing," one of them breathed, unable to hide their astonishment. "To annihilate so many monsters with a single attack," another remarked, his voice tinged with respect, as expected of an S-class chimera hunter. The man glanced at the swirling, fiery portal in the distance, his expression tense. "By the way, there's no sign of the gate closing. It's the third day," he said gravely. But then, another guy in a calmer tone told him to don't worry too much, saying, "No matter how many monsters pour out, as long as we have that S-class chimera, we can hold out indefinitely," he declared confidently. But as he spoke, a towering mass of monsters surged upward like a dark tidal wave, racing toward Number 17 standing defiantly at the peak. That man gripped his weapon tightly, the steel gleaming under the ominous crimson sky. "We just have to," he muttered, bracing himself for what was to come. "We just have to," he said, before swinging his blade in a swift, deadly arc. Green blood splattered as the monster was cleaved apart. "Deal with the stragglers that get through." The gate pulsed ominously, its swirling darkness framed by a blazing crimson glow. An unsettling hum filled the air, as if the portal itself was alive and waiting to unleash what lay beyond. A voice rang out urgently. "Red gate disappearance signal confirmed." The tension in the air thickened as the man in the long coat tightened his grip on his weapon. His eyes locked forward. "It's here," he said, his tone calm yet edged with anticipation, as the last remnants of slain monsters littered the ground around them. "All right, retreat! Everyone, exit through the gate!" The order rang out with urgency as boots pounded against the ground, their wearers sprinting toward safety before the portal closed. A clenched fist smashed forward with explosive force, the impact shattering the surface it struck as shockwaves rippled outward. Number 17 continued fighting. A massive red and blue creature attacked fiercely, its claws striking down at number 17 on the ground. Two hunters sprinted away from the scene. One of them, a red-haired woman, called out, "Wait, aren't we taking that number 17? The dark-haired man beside her replied without slowing down, "They said not to retrieve him." The red-haired woman questioned in disbelief, "Isn't that expensive?" Meanwhile, number 17 with piercing yellow eyes struggled under the crushing grip of the massive red and blue claw. "They said its lifespan was over anyway," the man's detached voice replied. As they sprinted toward the gate, the red-haired woman's voice wavered with guilt. "I feel kinda bad. If it weren't for him, the damage would have been immense this time." The dark-haired man shot her a sidelong glance and replied bluntly, "Why worry unnecessarily? You know those guys are practically inorganic." His words were cold, stripping away any sense of individuality. Number 17 was trapped in a crushing grip, blood dripping where the claws dug into its flesh. The enemy's hold was unyielding, as if determined to never let it go. But with one brutal strike, number 17 tore the limb free, spraying white fluid across the air. The blood-soaked figure, hair whipping wildly, stood tall despite the chaos. In the silence that followed, only one truth rang in number 17's mind: they're monsters. The mission was simple: protect the hunter's rear at all costs. The battle raged on. Number 17 tore through enemies, severed limbs flying across the ground. It stood firm, holding the line so others could move forward safely. A monstrous jaw lunged toward it, glowing eyes filled with hunger. But before it could bite down, blue lightning crackled through the darkness. Power surged from number 17, a sphere of energy blazing in its grasp. Its golden eye gleamed fiercely under its horned crown, as it unleashed a colossal blast of blue and white energy. The ground split open, debris flying high as the destructive beam ripped everything in its path apart. Even as smoke and lightning filled the battlefield, a calm voice echoed in its mind. "Do you understand?" Wrapped in a green poisonous mist, number 17 staggered forward, bleeding heavily. Blood dripped from its jagged teeth, its claws still raised, refusing to surrender. Through the haze, the words pulsed in its head: "There is nothing else. When the mission ends, you don't return." The comms crackled with number 17's cold report: "Retreat route secured." Its severed claw fell heavily to the ground, lifeless. The mission was complete. Around it, the battlefield was covered in green monster blood, bodies piled in broken heaps. At the center, number 17 lay battered and dying, while the remains of a severed claw rested beside him. With massive, slime-covered number 17 loomed in the light, its jagged teeth bared as thick green fluid dripped from its body. In his mind, a voice instructed him that return is not permitted. On this day, the final mission report for Chimera Hunter number 17, who met its demise, was recorded as follows: number of hunter deaths, 0. The battlefield was littered with the corpses of countless monsters, their twisted forms sprawled in heaps across the cracked earth. In the foreground, the massive segmented body of a slain creature lay still, green blood pooling beneath it. At the center of the carnage, a lone figure remained motionless, surrounded by the remnants of the brutal fight. The once towering threat had been eradicated, leaving only silence in its wake. Total number of monsters subjugated, 1,823. The staggering count was a testament to the scale of the battle. One hunter against an overwhelming tide of monstrosities, leaving behind nothing but carnage. At the moment of death, in number 17's mind, fragments of an unrecorded past began to surface. It recalled that it had once been a complete human, and that it was kidnapped at the age of 9. Starting from that memory, a panorama of number 17's life began to flash before its eyes. Unfortunately, number 17's damaged brain couldn't fully comprehend the meaning behind those scenes. It calmly watched its past life unfold. 79 years ago, at the District 13 orphanage, a man stood outside holding a baby. Looking down at the child, he read softly, "The child's name is..." 70 years ago, a boy sat silently on a chair, his head lowered. A man stood before him, scolding, "You hit a friend with a stone because they teased you a bit? How many times has this happened now?" The boy remained wordless. Snow fell quietly outside as the doors slammed shut with a loud bang. "We can't keep you anymore." With those words echoing in his mind, the boy stepped out into the falling snow, arms crossed against the cold, leaving the orphanage behind. The boy collapsed face first into the snow, his breath visible in the cold air. a looming shadow stretched over him, hinting at someone, or something, approaching. One of the men scoffed, remarking on how, in the slums, children could be found rolling around in the snow. Another voice followed, cold and transactional, asking, "How much is all this?" Strapped to a cold metal table, the boy lay motionless, his limbs bound by restraints and electrodes fixed to his skin. His mouth was gagged, preventing any cry for help. A gloved hand loomed over him, holding a syringe filled with a mysterious purple liquid. From somewhere in the room, a voice questioned with chilling detachment, "Is it a new experimental subject?" In a dimly lit laboratory, several scientists stood around the restrained boy, discussing his identity with clinical detachment. "What number?" one asked. "It's number 17, another replied without hesitation. A quiet observation followed, laced with grim certainty. Spells must have been cast to ensure there was no chance of escape. One of the masked scientists gave a curt order. "Okay, record it." Another, holding a clipboard, noted in a clinical tone, "Number 17. S plus class silkworm larva cell injection." Number 17's restrained hand twitched violently, the black tattoo stark against his pale skin. One of the observers spoke with clinical anticipation. "Let's watch now. What kind of reaction will appear?" One of the researchers stared at the readings in disbelief. "No side effects." Another observed the restrained boy in the chair and added, "A special ability has appeared, but his human form and ego are maintained." One of the researchers examined the data carefully and remarked, "It seems to have a unique constitution." Another, with a cold and clinical tone, ordered, "Keep implanting various things until there's a reaction." The group of scientists huddled closely together under the harsh white light, their lab coats forming a wall of secrecy. Whatever they were observing seemed to demand their full attention, the air in the dimly lit lab thick with tension. Then 64 years ago, in the midst of a crumbling room, number 17 stood firm, energy radiating in a brilliant blue sphere between his hands. The ground beneath him cracked from the force, while behind him, two figures struggled, one coughing on the floor, and another cowering in fear. In front of him, a beast with golden fur and a spiked crest loomed, the tension between them crackling in the air. A massive, horned insect-like creature with a yellow and black armored body charged forward at full speed. Its jagged jaws were wide open in a feral roar, sharp fangs bared, and its bladed wings cut through the air as it hurtled toward its target with deadly intent. The blurred cityscape behind it made its speed and ferocity even more terrifying. The monstrous hornet lunged forward with blinding speed, but suddenly a brilliant sphere of blue energy comes towards it. The intense light illuminated its snarling jaws and menacing stinger, moments before the inevitable impact. Number 17 extended his gloved hand toward the incoming force, blue energy swirling violently at his command. Sparks of flame danced along his arm, and the ground beneath his feet cracked and splintered from the sheer power radiating outward. The woman, clutching a young girl tightly in her arms, looked up with a relieved smile. Her voice trembled with emotion as she said, "Thank you for saving me." The fear in her eyes was slowly replaced by gratitude, while the child held on to her quietly, still wary of their surroundings. One of the uniformed men, his shoulders heavy with guilt, looked at the number 17 and said, "I'm sorry to put such a burden on a child like you." Number 17, his face calm and voice steady, simply replied, "It's fine." The scene shifted to a pair of sturdy black boots stepping onto the cracked ground, the words, 59 years ago, marking the moment. Number 17 stood in the middle of a ruined battlefield, surrounded by shattered debris, the severed limbs of monstrous creatures, and craters embedded in the ground. His mind felt clouded, his thoughts fragmented. Why am I here? The question echoed in his head as he struggled to recall anything. What was I doing just now? He wondered, staring blankly at the carnage around him, as if a crucial piece of his memory had just slipped away. From behind, a man in a white lab coat with round glasses called out, "Oh, number 17, why did you stop?" There was a faint, almost mocking curiosity in his tone as he added, "Did your memory get confused?" His calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the chaotic battlefield around them. The man in the white lab coat threw his arms wide, his face lit with unsettling excitement. "Your side effects have finally begun," he declared, almost gleefully. Standing a short distance away, number 17 stared at him in confusion. His thoughts clouded. "Side effects?" he echoed silently, unsure of what the scientist meant. The man in the lab coat carefully documented his observations, noting, "As a result of implanting over 500 types of monster cells for 15 years, 54 years ago, deep within a secret laboratory, relentless experiments took place. The result was extraordinary, a being with power beyond measure, possessing at least an S-rank hunter classification. his true strength practically incalculable. Now, bound in heavy chains and drenched in blood, Number 17 sat restrained in a chair, his monstrous aura radiating in the dim light. The scientist, unable to hide his manic pride, declared him the lab's greatest success. 20 years ago, a gloved hand held out a piece of raw meat, the gesture deliberate and coaxing. "All right, Number 17, good boy," the voice called out softly, as if speaking to something dangerous that needed careful handling. The young woman flinched back in shock as a large bird-like creature with sharp features and blazing orange eyes lunged toward her. "Whoa!" she exclaimed, instinctively stepping away from the sudden, aggressive movement. The woman crouched a short distance away, smiling in satisfaction. "See? I told you it would eat," she said, watching the creature tear into its meal. This monster was Number 17, nearby. A mother turned away in disgust. "It's gross." A man gently covered his young son's eyes. "Don't look at things like that," he said firmly. 3 days ago, a blinding surge of energy erupted in the air, splitting the sky with crackling light. Number 17's golden eyes widened, reflecting the storm of power as arcs of electricity danced violently around it. Massive, grotesque Number 17 let out a final haunting roar as its body began to dissolve into fragments of light. Its fading voice echoed through the air, repeating in a broken mechanical tone, "All missions complete." As the sun dipped low on the horizon, its golden rays illuminated a vast, jagged chasm that tore through the barren land. The ground was littered with bones and remnants of the fallen, a silent testament to the devastation that had unfolded here. A haunting wind whispered through the canyon, carrying with it the echoes of battles long past. Amid the desolate expanse, a single weathered bone lay half buried in the dust. The bone shifted suddenly, scraping against the dry earth as if stirred by an unseen force. In an instant, with a blinding pillar of light, that bone erupted from the ground, tearing through the darkness and piercing the sky. A massive spinal column, brimming with crackling energy, shot up from the earth, each segment pulsing with unnatural vitality. The narration echoed ominously. This was no ordinary relic. It carried within it the combined power of 527 different types of monster cells, a grotesque fusion of countless creatures' strengths. Its skeletal frame continued to assemble, ribs locking into place around a dark, pulsating core. This abomination was no mere monster, but Chimera Hunter Number 17, a weapon forged from the cells of hundreds of deadly beasts, reborn for one purpose alone. From its spine and ribs, sinewy cords of muscle began weaving into place, twisting and binding together with unnatural speed. The once lifeless bones pulsed with grotesque vitality, each fiber brimming with monstrous power as the creature's body took shape. A blinding explosion erupted, flooding the darkness with searing light. Then bare feet touched down softly on the cracked ground, the air around them still hazy with lingering smoke from the explosion. He looked down at his hands in disbelief, his voice trembling. What is this? The unfamiliar warmth of flesh replacing what he had once been. A haze of confusion filled his mind as he took in his transformed body. Human again now? He asked himself, the words barely more than a whisper. Bathed in the warm glow of the rising sun, he stood at the center of the barren land, his shadow stretching long across the cracked earth. The massive stone arch framed the light behind him, as if the world itself was announcing his return. Revival. The man stood there, looking down at himself in disbelief. His voice trembled as he wondered if he had truly returned to being human again. He looked at his hand, noticing the monstrous claws that had formed. Although he appeared human, he realized that the monster cells within him still remained, meaning he couldn't truly call himself human. Reflecting on the situation, he thought that a lot of time must have passed, and since the lab hadn't come to retrieve him, something unusual was going on. He realized he had been discarded. The experimental number once engraved on his wrist had vanished as well. Looking at his hand, he wondered if this meant he was finally free, no longer bound to the lab or its control. Thinking about the nature of this power, he concluded that such a transformation could only belong to an immortal-type ability. He understood the nature of the ability. It allowed the body to revive up to 3 times, as long as its core remained intact and wasn't destroyed. He recalled how it was believed that human and immortal cells could never fuse. Yet, looking at himself now, he realized that his body had fully recovered, restored to its peak condition. He realized that with all the side effects of the experiment gone, his condition had reached its best state. The constant haze that clouded his mind since the beginning had finally lifted. Even the spells engraved on him to prevent escape or rebellion had completely disappeared. He thought to himself that if his existence as experiment number 17 had truly ended, then perhaps it was finally time for him to live a normal life, as a human. He reflected that number 17 was nothing more than a label forced on him by the lab. His true identity had been buried beneath that number. He remembered someone once telling him that while he might seem rough or even unstable, he should strive to live with purpose, by consciously helping others. He recalled the words spoken to him. If he could live a life helping countless others, that would give him true purpose. And in that moment, his original name came back to him, Cheon Do-woon. He scoffed at the idea, calling it nonsense. To him, the thought of helping others felt meaningless. After all, how could an orphan who grew up in the slums possibly be capable of saving anyone else? It didn't make sense. He stood at the edge of the cliff, staring into the vast horizon as the sun set. With his thoughts heavy, he questioned what path he should take now. The idea of revenge echoed in his mind, tempting him as a possible answer. He realized that revenge wasn't something he could pursue blindly. It required a clear target standing before him, someone to focus that rage upon. He admitted to himself that the events which had once fueled his hatred now felt so distant that his desire for revenge no longer burned as fiercely. Besides, there was no way for him to return to the human world at this moment. He decided that if he lived long enough, he would eventually cross paths with them again. For now, he pushed the thought aside, telling himself he would deal with it when the time came. He narrowed his eyes, his gaze firm and focused as he looked down on his lower body. He stood tall, his back to the setting sun as its light shone through him, casting a powerful silhouette. In silence, he faced the horizon, lost in thought about the uncertain path ahead. At last, he made his choice. For the time being, he decided to set everything else aside and try living, at least a little, like a human. As he took his first steps forward, a simple but important thought crossed his mind. If he was going to live like a human, the first thing he needed was clothes. As he walked across the barren land, he wondered to himself, when was the last time he had even worn clothes? The thought felt distant, almost foreign, after everything he had been through. As he wandered near the shimmering lake, he wondered what material he could possibly use to make clothes. The thought lingered in his mind. Whatever it was, it would need to be tough enough to last. Peeking through the bushes, he considered his next step. Perhaps it was best to look around the area for something useful, anything that could serve as material for clothes. As he searched, something caught his attention. With a curious look, he leaned closer and muttered, This is... He came across the fallen body of a large beast. Observing its state, he wondered if it had died in a territorial dispute. Judging by the lack of major injuries, he concluded that it must have been an exceptionally strong creature. Looking closer at the creature, he realized the truth. It hadn't fallen in battle. Instead, it must have died from poison. He smirked with satisfaction and raised his hand. Good, he muttered, relieved. It was perfect timing, just when he needed leather. Without hesitation, he drew his blade. As sparks of energy flashed, his hand turned into a blade. This was another creature's power he got. Holding the curved blade firmly, he muttered with a faint smile, I guess I'll need a blade to make it easier, right? He recalled the lessons he had learned back at the lab. First, cut the belly straight, then make incisions along the limbs, right? He muttered to himself, visualizing the steps in his mind. With a determined look, he nodded to himself and said, Okay, let's try it. As he pressed the blade down, blood unexpectedly seeped out, making his eyes widen in shock, and the next second, his body was suddenly enveloped in a surge of dark gas that comes out of that bird's body. Eyes narrowing, he muttered in disbelief. This is... The air around him twisted violently as a sinister miasma spread out. His eyes widened in realization. Poisonous aura. The ground darkened, trees withered, and even the fallen beast nearby convulsed under the suffocating energy. Despite the poisonous aura swirling violently around him, his body remained completely unharmed, no damage. Glancing at the faint stench in the air, he muttered calmly, It smells. I'll have to wash it. After finishing his task, he looked at his handiwork with satisfaction. It's done. Not bad for a first try, is it? He remarked proudly. Then, without hesitation, he turned his gaze forward and muttered, Next. He stepped into the clear stream, the cool water rippling around his hand as bubbles rose to the surface with each movement. After cleaning it, he examined the hide in his hand, puzzled. It looked soft when I saw it, he muttered, tugging at the material. But as he tested its texture, he frowned. Is it because it's monster hide? It's too stiff. It's not like it's a metal plate or something. His eyes widened as an idea suddenly struck him, a spark of realization lighting up his expression. Oh, in times like this, he exclaimed, clearly having thought of a solution. Without hesitation, he slammed his fists down on the monster hide repeatedly, using brute force to soften and shape it. The ground shook with each powerful strike. Panting slightly, he glanced at his work and muttered, "Is this how you tanned?" He wasn't entirely sure of the process, but reasoning aloud, he added, "Well, it must be, right?" He lifted the processed hide in his hands, giving it a gentle shake. A bright smile spread across his face as he thought, "Oh, it's done. It's soft." The once stiff monster hide had transformed into a smooth, pliable material, just as he had hoped. He nodded in satisfaction, holding the tanned hide. "Good," he murmured. "The size should be roughly this, right?" Everything seemed to be coming together just as he had envisioned. Just then, the bird beast which he just skinned, a small fire awaked on it, showing that it's alive. After cutting the hide roughly to size, he held it up with determination. But then, the fiery creature unexpectedly emerged from the ground, glaring at him with a fierce intensity. He didn't notice that, and with a burst of strength, he clenched his fist tightly around the pelt, the force radiating outward as the fabric tore under the pressure, showing his sheer determination. He slipped the hide into place, adjusting it around his body with a firm pull. Looking at the result, he smirked slightly and muttered, "Not bad," clearly satisfied with his handiwork. Standing tall under the clear blue sky, he admired his handiwork. The rough, makeshift garment clung snugly to his frame as he tightened the belt around his waist. With a satisfied smile, he declared, "It fits my body perfectly." As he adjusted his rough new clothing, he noticed a strange sensation in his shoulder. Pulling the fabric aside, his eyes narrowed at the sight of a dark purple mark spreading faintly across his skin. Examining it closely, his expression turned serious as he realized, the poison hasn't fully drained. He let out a thoughtful hum, knowing this was something he couldn't ignore. As he sighed in annoyance, deciding to just wear his makeshift clothes despite the discomfort, a strange sound caught his attention. Startled, he turned toward the source and froze. By the water's edge, the creature he thought was long dead suddenly stirred, flames flickering weakly from its head. With a puzzled look, he muttered, "What? Wasn't it dead?" The creature suddenly gasped and choked, its twin flaming heads twitching as if in distress. Despite its weak state, it seemed to react to his presence, almost as though it could understand him. Observing the strange creature struggling yet still alive, he stroked his chin thoughtfully. "Seeing that it's alive despite having rigor mortis," he muttered, narrowing his eyes. "This one must be an immortal type too." He looked at the struggling creature, its flames flickering weakly. "If it were before, I would have killed it without hesitation, because I was a hunter. But now, as he studied it more closely, he realized, the opponent is already weakened, and not even a threat. There's no need to kill it." He looked at the weakened creature and smiled softly. "You and I are both lucky. Since it's our second life, let's live well." As he turned and walked away, he glanced back one last time. "If fate allows, we'll meet again somewhere," he said calmly. The weakened creature lay in silence, its fiery gaze following him as he disappeared into the distance. Bare footsteps echoed softly against the rocky ground as he slowly emerged from the shadows, each step carrying an eerie weight in the silence. Now that he had managed to take care of his clothes, he walked forward with determination. What he needed next was clear. "I need a house," he thought, already planning his next step for survival. Suddenly the ground beneath him began to crack, faint sparks flickering out as the stones split apart. Something was about to emerge from below. With a deafening screech, a colossal centipede-like monster burst forth, its sharp mandibles snapping and its many legs clawing at the ground. The man stood calmly, hands folded behind his back, staring up at the towering creature without a hint of fear. The monstrous centipede loomed high above, its razor-sharp claws glinting menacingly as it prepared to strike. From below, the man stood firm, gazing up at the towering beast with unwavering calm, his posture unshaken despite the terrifying sight. The young man looked up at the towering creature with calm eyes, tilting his head slightly as he asked, almost casually, "Is it too dark here?" With a single sweeping motion of his arm, the young man unleashed a devastating strike. A sharp arc of force ripped through the air, slicing cleanly across the monstrous centipede's body. Green blood sprayed wildly as the beast screeched in agony, its massive form reeling back under the overwhelming power of his attack. The young man calmly turned his back. With his hands folded neatly behind him, he walked toward the light at the end of the tunnel. His voice was cold and indifferent as he dismissed the fallen creature with just one word: rejected. Then he went to a snowy mountain. A cold wind swept across the mountains, carrying with it a relentless flurry of snow. Their large, white-furred beast with a blue face lay in the snow, its mouth wide open in a cry filled with sharp fangs. Snowflakes fell around it as it struggled. Our MC walked past the fallen snow beasts lying across the ground. Looking at the desolate, frozen land around him, he thought to himself that it would be difficult to find any food in such a place. So this place was also rejected. He then walked through the dense forest, and suddenly he wrinkled his nose in disgust. The foul odor in the air made him frown, and he muttered to himself about how unbearable the smell was. This was also rejected. He then stepped into a dark cave. Noticing the damp walls and the sticky green liquid dripping down from above, the air felt heavy and wet, making him frown in discomfort as he muttered to himself that the place was far too humid. This was also rejected. He left the damp cave behind, only to step into another place where streams of lava glowed brightly. The intense heat pressed against him, and with a weary sigh, he muttered that it was unbearably hot. He also rejected it. Stepping out into the open, he was met with a clear blue sky and warm sunlight pouring down. Standing tall on the edge of a rocky cliff, he looked around in surprise and quietly muttered, "Oh," as the brightness washed over him. Standing atop the cliff, he gazed at the breathtaking sight before him. Lush greenery, cascading waterfalls, and a rainbow shimmering in the sunlight. With a hint of surprise, he admitted to himself that the scenery was quite impressive. He never thought he would one day find the demon realm beautiful. Looking out at the peaceful scenery, he wondered aloud if he should explore further. Without hesitation, he leapt gracefully from the cliffside, ready to look around a bit more. He landed with force, the ground cracking beneath him as dust and debris scattered. The impact shook the earth, showing the sheer strength behind his leap. He stood by the water's edge, gazing down at the clear surface. Beneath the gentle ripples, schools of fish swam freely. Observing the scene, he noted that the water was clean and full of life, with plenty of fish to be found. From beneath the surface, sharp-toothed fish lunged upward with menacing glares, their jaws wide open. Watching them, he thought they looked quite delicious. He imagined that if he caught one and roasted it on the spot, it would feel just like camping. He rubbed his chin thoughtfully, imagining a simple life by the water. With the abundance of fish acting as a natural food source, he pictured himself building a small house, sitting outside by a campfire, and living peacefully in the area. As he walked further, his eyes caught sight of bright yellow flowers blooming under the clear sky. As he continued walking, he noticed the fresh scent carried by the breeze. Standing among the tall trees with sunlight filtering gently through the leaves, he took a deep breath of the fresh air. Surrounded by flowers and greenery, he felt a sense of peace, and simply thought to himself, "Good." With a calm smile, he looked up at the sunlight streaming through the leaves above. Feeling at peace, he softly envisioned the name for his future home, Cheon Do-woon House. As leaves gently rustled down from the trees, a single word seemed to echo through the air: approved. At the same time, in that dungeon beneath the wide blue sky, leaves drifted gently across the open plains. The land stretched far into the distance, with mountains rising faintly on the horizon, as if marking the beginning of a new journey. Suddenly, cracks began to spread across the space. The cracks in the space split wide open, releasing a blinding blue light. In an instant, a swirling vortex appeared, twisting violently as if tearing through space itself, ready to connect this land to another realm. With a thunderous crash, something comes out of the vortex and slammed into the ground, scattering dirt and debris in every direction. From within the smoke and dust, a dark figure emerged. Sparks of red energy crackled around its body, and its heavy steps pressed into the ground. Through the smoke and glowing embers, a robot-like figure appeared, its eyes burning a deep, menacing red. Sparks of energy flickered across its body as it looked around, its mechanical voice echoing with a question. "This is the demon realm." On the other hand, our MC clenched his fist, determination shining in his eyes. He told himself that the first step would be finding a proper site to build his house, setting the foundation for the life he envisioned. With a powerful motion, golden energy burst forth from his hand, arcing through the air. It shot downward like a blazing streak of light, slamming into the forest below with explosive force, marking the spot where he intended to build his home. The golden energy struck the forest floor with blinding force, instantly slicing through the massive trees. MC surveyed the fallen trees and the cleared land with a nod of satisfaction. "This much for the site should be enough," he murmured, acknowledging that the space was now ready to begin the next stage of construction. With a wave of his hand, the logs floated up, bound by glowing strands of energy. He carefully separated the sturdy, well-preserved trees from the rest. MC stood with his arms crossed, gazing at the neatly stacked logs. "This many trees should be enough," he muttered thoughtfully. Then his eyes shifted to the stumps scattered across the clearing, a slight frown crossing his face. "Is the floor too uneven?" he wondered, already considering the next step in preparing the site. MC gripped tightly and pulled with all his strength. In an instant, the ground erupted with a thunderous crack as roots and earth were torn apart. Splinters, soil, and leaves burst into the air, the sheer force of his action flattening the uneven land beneath him. He looked over the vast cleared land, satisfied with the result of his effort. The once uneven ground was now leveled, open to the sky. He pressed his hand firmly against the wooden surface, his thoughts calm and focused. I just moved my hands and feet as my heart guided me, he reflected, allowing instinct to lead the way rather than overthinking. Balancing the massive log on one shoulder, he examined the ground carefully. First, I'll plant pillars at each corner, he muttered. The heavy logs sank into the ground with a solid thud as he planted them firmly in place. What do they call this? Free will? He wondered, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Despite the sweat on his brow, there was a lightness in his heart. Anyway, it's fun. Is it because it's my first time building my own house? He thought, feeling an unfamiliar sense of satisfaction. He moved quickly, almost like a blur, placing one plank after another with steady precision, straightening the base of the structure. Step by step, the house was beginning to take shape. He examined the sticky green substance oozing in his hand, its slimy texture bubbling faintly. Building walls, he muttered. Since there were no nails to use, he had to improvise. With a firm nod, he decided, I'll use snail-type monster mucus instead. He carefully pressed the logs together, using the thick green mucus as adhesive. Once it hardens, he thought, it'll be as solid as rock. A faint smile crossed his face as he added, waterproofing, in a way, as the bright sky, golden rays spilling down as the leaves rustled gently in the breeze. Now, for the finishing touches, he murmured, ready to complete his work. He looked up with a satisfied smile, hands resting on his hips as the sunlight shone down on him. Good, he said confidently. Most monsters won't even dare to approach. MC stood proudly in front of the small wooden hut, its walls reinforced with snail-type monster mucus, and decorated with silkworm larva's cocoon silk. Despite its unusual construction, he smiled with satisfaction. Quite cozy. I like it, he said, clearly pleased with his work. He stood in thought as he examined his work. But it's a bit lacking, he muttered to himself, a slight frown forming. It felt like something was missing, though he couldn't immediately put his finger on what it was. He pondered to himself, what was a normal human house like? His mind drifted back to a memory of a classroom. A teacher stood at the front, pointing to a projection on the screen. See, this is what a regular house looked like before the gate opened, the teacher explained, as the students watched an image of an ordinary home with people and a dog in the yard. He recalled the images from the educational videos he had seen back at the lab. In those recordings, families often gathered happily in their yards, children laughing, parents smiling, and even pets playing around. He glanced into the distance, watching the empty yard. That said, I can't raise human world dogs in the demon realm, he admitted to himself, realizing the harsh reality of his situation. Kneeling down and pressing his hand against the ground, he muttered to himself, plants? Should I make a vegetable garden? But what can I even plant in the demon realm? His eyes widened in realization, and with a sudden spark of inspiration, something had just come to his mind. He suddenly remembered something important. There was a snowy mountain nearby, he thought, eyes lighting up at the idea. Then, with a spark of excitement, he wondered aloud, should I plant mandragora? As snow whirled fiercely around the towering peak, the mountain shrouded in a relentless blizzard. The icy winds howled as if warning anyone who dared to approach. Mandragora's habitat lies in the deepest, mana-dense peaks of snowy mountains. But our MC trudged barefoot through the icy terrain, snowflakes swirling all around him. He muttered to himself with a shiver. Speaking of which, it's really snowing a lot. As expected of a snowy mountain, snow fell heavily around him as he looked up at the gray sky. A distant memory surfaced. It was snowing this heavily the day I was kidnapped to the lab too, he thought, the bitter recollection weighing on him like the icy flakes settling on his hair and shoulders. The memory replayed vividly in his mind. At that moment, back then, it was so cold he actually thought being kidnapped was a relief. Looking back, there are some good points about becoming a chimera, he thought. Unlike before, when the cold could strip away his life, now he felt none of its bite. Hunger and freezing, once constant threats, were no longer concerns. It was a grim sort of comfort, but a comfort nonetheless. The snowfall began to ease, the once blinding flurry now reduced to drifting flakes that swayed gently in the wind. Anyway, judging by the mana I'm feeling, I must be almost there, he thought. He stopped in his tracks, his gaze falling on the small cluster of vibrant green plants pushing through the snow, their leaves glistening despite the cold. Found it, he muttered with relief. Luckily, it wasn't a wasted trip. MC knows that plants in front of him has fragile nature. Mandragora are sunfish-like monsters, highly vulnerable to stress. They can die from even the smallest environmental changes. MC crouched in the snow, carefully examining the plants. If I'm going to relocate them, I guess younger, more adaptable individuals would be better, right? He muttered to himself. With a measured decision, he concluded, just 3 roots would be enough. As he yanked the mandragora from the ground, the realization struck him immediately. They're going to scream. I should have covered my ears. As he pulled the plant from the ground, instead of a scream, the little mandragora let out a soft sound. The small creature wiggled in his hand, its leafy head swaying and its round body covered in bits of soil. He blinked in surprise and thought, huh? What is this? He carefully pulled out another mandragora. The tiny creature blinked and let out a soft sound. He looked at it in surprise and thought, one more. He stared at the tiny creature in his hand and thought in disbelief, this one too. The little mandragora wriggled loudly, surprising him even more. He looked at the little creatures in disbelief and thought, no way. Are they? The tiny mandragoras wriggled in his hands, making soft noises. Watching them closely, he wondered, are they sleep-talking? It was well known that mandragora scream is actually a phenomenon that happens only when humans artificially cultivate them. It was revealed that in the low-mana human world, when mandragoras are placed under extreme stress, if they are forcibly pulled out, they let out a terrifying scream, and die as a result. MC observed that since this was the demon realm, the mandragoras didn't scream when pulled out. However, what puzzled him was their lack of resistance. At this point, they should have been struggling desperately to escape, yet they remained still. He suddenly realized the reason behind the mandragora's unusual behavior. Instead of resisting, they seemed to recognize him as kin. Because mandragora cells had also been implanted in his body, he calmly tucked the small mandragoras away, relieved by how easily they accepted him. With a faint smile, he thought that this worked out well. After all, it was better for them if they felt less stressed. MC began to imagine the possibilities for the future. Once the mandragoras had grown well, he thought, perhaps he could ask them for a few root tendrils to brew tea, or even enjoy their fruits as snacks. The thought made him smile as he pictured it vividly. He suddenly recalled an important fact. If the mandragora fruit was forcibly picked, it would become extremely poisonous. Realizing this, he concluded that he would have to persuade them kindly instead of trying to take it by force. MC stood on the snowy cliffside, his eyes narrowing as he listened carefully. From the distance, faint cries echoed through the mountains. It seems there are hunters nearby, he muttered. Though uncertain of their purpose, he couldn't understand why anyone would risk venturing into such a dangerous snowy mountain. He smirked with a confident glint in his eyes. Turning slightly, he asked aloud, almost playfully, shall I go grab some gatestone quickly? On the other hand, 2 men were fighting something. One of the men clenched his teeth in fury, shouting, damn it, to use us as bait and run off. His companion, gripping his weapon tightly, snapped back with urgency. They're coming again. The tension in their voices revealed just how dire their situation had become. From the darkness of the snowy forest, monstrous creatures lunged down upon the hunters with terrifying speed. The 2 men on the ground braced themselves, weapons raised, but the overwhelming number of beasts was too much. A monstrous snow beast lunged forward, its gaping jaws splitting unnaturally wide. Inside its maw, rows of razor-sharp fangs glistened, but what was even more horrifying were the writhing, fleshy tentacles that extended from its throat. The hunters were now face to face with a nightmare far beyond their imagination. One man thrust his hand forward, summoning a glowing blue barrier that blocked the charging beasts. The creatures slammed into the shield with force, but he gritted his teeth and held on, straining under the impact. Sweat ran down that man's face as he gritted his teeth, his expression filled with strain and fear. His strength was failing, and with a trembling voice he muttered, no good. Cracks began to spread across the barrier, glowing faintly under the pressure. His hands trembled with effort as he realized in fear, the barrier will break soon. The cracks in the glowing barrier spread rapidly as the man's strength faltered. Beads of sweat rolled down his face while regret filled his thoughts. He cursed himself silently. I should have just stuck to odd jobs. Why did I even volunteer to find the chimera? The barrier finally shattered into glowing shards, scattering into the air. The man screamed in pure desperation, his voice cracking, help! As monstrous beasts lunged toward him. Just then a light shined in the sky. It crashed down from the sky, followed by a deafening explosion. The ground erupted, blasting dirt and stone into the air as shockwaves tore through the battlefield. The monsters, feral rabbit-like beasts with bloodthirsty eyes, snarled and growled, surrounding the 2 men trapped in the chaos. One soldier, barely able to stay on his feet, trembled as he raised his gun, while the other sat on the snow, wide-eyed and frozen in terror. His voice cracked as he stammered, what is that? From within the swirling smoke, an ominous silhouette slowly began to emerge. Through the thick smoke, The soldiers squinted their eyes in shock. One of them stammered in disbelief, realizing the dark silhouette was not a beast, but a human figure slowly emerging from the haze. Out of the dust and smoke, and our MC finally appeared. His face was calm and unreadable, his silence carrying more weight than words as he stood there. He narrowed his eyes at the creature before him. It looked like a snow rabbit, but its fierce glare and sharp fangs revealed it was anything but ordinary. But the snow rabbits froze in place, as an ominous presence loomed above the MC. He released his killing instinct, and a massive, shadowy figure with glowing eyes appeared, its terrifying aura filling the air. The snow rabbits screamed in terror, their cries echoing through the frozen forest. Panic spread among them as they leapt and scattered in every direction, desperately trying to escape. The two hunters stared in shock, disbelief written across their faces. One clutched his wounded arm, his voice trembling said, "It's impossible, a B-class monster, running away as soon as it sees him." In the quiet moment that followed, one hunter expressed gratitude, saying how thankful they were for being saved. One of the hunter introduced himself as Kim Tae-hoon, and pointed to his companion, Oh Seong-ju. With a respectful tone, he asked MC for his name. MC calmly replied that he is Cheon-do-woon. Kim Tae-hoon's mind raced as he studied the MC before him. Cheon-do-woon? I've never heard that name before, he thought. The MC's ragged outfit only deepened his suspicion. What's with those clothes? Could he be a reclusive hunter? MC couldn't help but question. Why are they here? From their appearance, they clearly seemed like a D-class hunter. There was no way they didn't know how dangerous the snowy mountain was. One hunter hesitated before replying that this is because of money. They told MC that a request had been issued to capture a chimera alive. The reward offered was said to be substantial. Hearing this, MC's eyes sharpened as he muttered softly to himself. A chimera, one of the hunter explained with a laugh that a test subject had escaped from the lab. It was said to be some kind of machine creature, and while fleeing, it supposedly jumped into a gate. Hearing this, MC thought to himself with relief, if it's a machine creature, then they're not looking for me. MC made up his mind, thinking to himself, I should grab the gate stone and go. MC then questioned suspiciously, but where are your bags? You didn't come to the demon realm empty-handed, did you? The gate stone, one of the hunter quickly made up an excuse, stammering. Those team members, those guys took everything and ran off. Clutching his wounded shoulder, the man gritted his teeth and shouted, they intended that from the start. Inwardly, he regretted not realizing it sooner, thinking, I should have noticed when that B-class hunter offered to let me join. Those traitorous hunters laughed and fled, leaving monsters in their wake. Hearing that MC thought to himself, then the gate stone is with them. The nervous hunters, their bodies trembling from exhaustion, pleaded with MC, don't you have any plans to return? We're almost at our limit, you see, one stammered desperately. The other added, you know well what happens when you're contaminated by mana, don't you? They looked at him with a mix of fear and urgency, hoping for mercy. Well, the time a hunter could endure in Demon Realm varied greatly depending on their awakening grade. If they failed to return to the human world in time to purify the mana within them, most would inevitably die. But there was one anomaly. Our MC was the exception. Both of the hunters' desperate voices echoed. One asks that, can't he please take them to the human world, adding that his pregnant wife is at home. But MC wasn't listening to them, and was using his powers to search the other hunters. Found them, he muttered, locking onto his targets with unwavering focus. The desperate plea of the hunters was suddenly cut short. With a thunderous burst, MC shot forward with terrifying speed, the force leaving a deep crater behind. The two hunters froze, wide-eyed, as Cheon-do-woon suddenly leapt into the sky with incredible speed. The hunters panicked and shouted after him. Mr. Cheon-do-woon! One of them cried out in shock. Where are you going? The other yelled, their voices filled with confusion and desperation. On the other hand, the little robot was running away, its glowing eyes fixed on the bright streak. It didn't say a word, only a quiet pause, as if processing everything it had just witnessed. The little robot reached at the edge of the snowy cliff, its small footprints trailing behind it. From above, it gazed down at the dark, thorn-filled forest below. Snow fell gently, but the eerie sight of the twisting shadows made it cautious. The robot quietly noted to itself that this place seemed very dangerous. From behind, a group of hunters spotted the small robot standing ahead on the snowy cliff. Seizing the moment, one of them shouted that this was their chance, and urged everyone to capture it quickly. Without hesitation, they all charged forward, shields and weapons ready. The small robot turned its head slightly, its glowing eyes steady as faint sparks lit up around its frame. In a calm yet ominous tone, it muttered, dangerous things. The robot's transformation was sudden. Its once warm yellow eyes now burned with a sinister red glow. Crimson sparks and violent energy crackled around its body as its form shifted into a darker, more menacing version of itself. The robot system activated, its cold voice echoing just one command. Its only purpose now was clear: to eliminate everything in its path. 4 warriors attacked the robot together. One leapt from above with a shield in hand. Another swung down with a glowing purple sword. A woman surrounded by a magical aura rushed forward, while a man with a heavy blade slashed fiercely from the ground. The robot, its body shining with red energy, raised its arm to defend against their combined assault as the battle exploded around them. Sometimes later, our MC arrived at that place. He looked ahead with surprise. In a worried voice, he wondered if he had arrived just a little too late. He walked across the blood-stained snow, noticing the abandoned gear scattered around. From the scene and a return stone floating in air, he realized that all the hunters had already run away. The hunters had even left behind their luggage in their rush to escape. On the ground, mixed among the bloodstains, were both small childlike footprints and the tracks of animals. Seeing that, MC wondered if the creature had been fighting those hunters while changing its form. He remembered those hunters telling him that an experimental subject had escaped from the lab. It was a mechanical creature, and during its escape, it transformed and jumped into a gate before vanishing. The creature was created from liquid metal, allowing it to freely change its shape. However, since the material was rare, it was made small, about the size of a child or a large dog. MC thought about the mechanical creature. The fact that it managed to overpower 5 B-rank hunters all on its own was truly impressive. On the other hand, Kim Yao urgently called out, telling Xiongju to snap out of it. Xiongju, weak and trembling, said he is done for, explaining that his whole body was contaminated with demonic energy. Kim Yao refused to accept it, shouting at him not to talk nonsense, and reminding him that his child was going to be born next month. With blood dripping from his mouth, Xiongju weakly begged Kim Yao to tell his wife that he was sorry. Tears streamed down his Kim Yao's face as he cried out desperately, pleading with Xiongju to hold on just a little longer. As despair filled the air, Kim Yao questioned if miracles truly existed. At that moment, a glowing figure stepped forward, their foot touching the ground like a sign of hope breaking through the darkness. Tears still streaming down Kim Yao's face, his eyes widened in shock as a sudden radiant light appeared before him. As the golden light cleared, the Kim Yao's eyes widened in disbelief. Standing before them was Cheon Do-woon, carrying a huge pack on his back. They were stunned to see that the pack he carried was their missing luggage. Immediately, Kim Yao rushed forward, going towards Cheon Do. He dropped to his knees in desperation, his voice trembling as he pleaded. He begged Cheon Do-woon to save them, his cries echoing through the snowy forest. Cheon Do-woon stood there surprised to see him. Kim Yao said he knew that in the lawless demon realm, once it's taken, it's over. So he fell to his knees, and takes out money with trembling hands, explaining that he and Seong-su had brought 2 checks worth 10 million won each, calling it the value of their lives. With desperation in his voice, he pleaded, begging to buy just 1 gate stone. Kim Yao's words echoed. He told MC that if they didn't return now, death was certain. Cheon Do-woon's eyes shifted to the checks trembling in the man's hands. 20 million won? He muttered, his expression unreadable. Cheon Do-woon thought to himself that he couldn't use the money right now, but it would definitely be useful once he went to the human world later. So Cheon Do-woon takes out a gate stone and broke it, releasing its energy. Kim Yao bowed deeply, holding on to Cheon Do-woon's hand with gratitude as the glowing return portal swirled behind them. With a trembling voice, he said that he would never forget this favor for the rest of his life. As chaos unfolded around him, Cheon Do-woon quietly looked at the stack of money in his hand, his face calm and unreadable. While Kim Yao turned to Xiongju, asking him to get up quickly, saying if they go fast, they might live. But before they leave, Cheon Do-woon asked them if a gate stone cost around 200,000 won in the human world. Kim Yao, supporting injured Xiongju, looked puzzled, and replied that gate stones now cost about 1 million won, and questioned why Cheon Do-woon was asking. Hearing that, Cheon Do-woon extended his hand towards Xiongju, and grabbed his shoulder, saying, "It just feels like he received too much." Cheon Do-woon smiled as faint blue energy started swirling around his fingers. With a calm tone, he told them that he would give them something else as change instead. Just as he said that, a surge of bright blue energy erupted around Cheon Do-woon, swirling like flames and shaking the air. Both of the hunters stared at him in shock. Blue flames of mana swirled violently in the air as Cheon Do-woon released his power. Kim Yao realized that Cheon Do-woon is injecting mana, covering his face from the overwhelming energy. He shouted, asking him Cheon Do-woon to wait, because he knows that injecting mana was an act so dangerous that even A-rank hunters avoided it. If the flow of mana clashed and became tangled, the mana core could shatter, causing both individuals to die instantly. The danger was clear. Kim Yao knows that if this continued any longer, both of them would undoubtedly perish. But as the mana flow stopped, Xiongju looked down at his hands in shock. A warm glow surrounded him as he realized what had happened. The demonic energy within him had been completely purified. In excitement, he hugged Kim Yao, whose eyes wide with shock and relief. Xiongju cried out with joy, shouting that they were alive. Both of them had survived. But deep down, Kim Yao still struggled to believe it, whispering to himself that such a thing should have been impossible. As Cheon Do-woon turned to leave, Xiongju behind him dropped to his knees in gratitude. He thanked him with teary eyes, swearing never to forget the favor. While Kim Yao could hardly believe what had just happened, Cheon Do-woon had purified demonic energy by injecting mana, something thought to be impossible without an overwhelming amount of power. After witnessing the impossible, a single thought echoed in their minds: just who exactly is Mr. Cheon Do-woon? On the other hand, Cheon Do-woon walked steadily with a large pack strapped to his back. His expression was calm as he let out a thoughtful hum, lost in his own thoughts. Cheon Do-woon arrived at his small wooden home, relieved to see that no intruders had disturbed it. He looked at it fondly. He thought it had been a satisfying outing, especially since he had gained some unexpected income. Cheon Do-woon glanced at the small mandragora tied to his waist who had waken up. Seeing its drooping leaves, he wondered if the long journey had worn it out. Cheon Do-woon knelt down in front of his small home, carefully planting those mandragora into the soil. As he worked, he thought to himself that this much should be enough. But as the small mandragora swayed in the soil, their faces gloomy. They let out low, unhappy sounds, clearly showing their dissatisfaction. MC noticed the little mandragora unhappy expression and frowned. He wondered aloud what they didn't like. Maybe they are upset because their home had been moved by force. Then, thinking further, he guessed they might be hungry from being carried around without soil. Cheon Do-woon reached out his hand, letting a soft blue glow of mana flow from his fingertips into the soil, asking little mandragora, shall he give them some mana because they usually enjoyed it. The little mandragora began to glow with joy, happily responding to the mana they had received. Watching this, Cheon Do-woon remarked that they seemed more at ease now. But Cheon Do-woon suddenly sensed something unusual. Narrowing his eyes, he thought to himself, this presence, it feels familiar. Cheon Do-woon realized that it's the robot the hunters have been chasing. It was a small mechanical creature, clutching branches as if to camouflage itself. Confused, MC wondered, what business does a machine like that have with me? Cheon Do-woon decided not to overthink it. Calmly, he thought to himself that, well, if it really has business with him, it'll show itself sooner or later. Cheon Do-woon glanced at the stack of money and thought to himself that there was no rush. He would keep it aside for now and only use it when he truly needed it later. Then he sat inside the wooden cabin and unpacked those hunters' backpack. Inside was cooking pots and many supplies. He looked down at them and thought to himself that it was time to organize the luggage he had brought. Cheon Do-woon began checking through his belongings one by one. He had a portable burner and a cooking pot set, perfect for outdoor cooking while hiking, camping, or fishing. There were also 8 gate stones, items that allowed free travel between the human world and the demon realm. He pulled out some spare clothes, though they were contaminated with pollen and needed washing before use. Lastly, he had 2 sleeping bags and a blanket, essential for staying warm at night. Seeing all of this, he thought to himself that those hunters had come very well prepared, which was definitely a good thing for MC. Cheon Do-woon picked up a red packet and realized it was ramen. A wave of nostalgia hit him, as he wondered if the last time he had eaten it was back when he was a child living in the orphanage. Cheon Do-woon smiled as he held the ramen packet in his hands. Feeling the hunger in his stomach, he thought it was the perfect time. With a spark of anticipation, he decided to try cooking ramen. Cheon Do-woon read the ramen recipe, which instructed him to fill 500 milliliters of water. Standing by the river with a pot in his hands, he wondered if he should just estimate the amount by weight. As Cheon Do-woon stood by the river with his pot, ready to collect water, a sudden splash broke the surface. Fierce-looking fish with sharp fins leapt out toward him. Cheon Do-woon, who held the pot of water, remembered that people usually add extra ingredients when cooking ramen. He thought that ramen would taste delicious with fish, and so strike with finger, killing the fish instantly. The recipe suggested adding ingredients like eggs or green onions for better taste. Cheon Do-woon noticed some roe and thought it should be fine to use as a replacement for eggs. Since there were no green onions around, Cheon Do-woon decided to use some other greens he found, thinking it would work just as well. Cheon Do-woon finished gathering all the ingredients, placing them into the pot. With everything ready, he decided it was time to head back. As Cheon Do-woon walked back with the pot in hand, a metallic foot appeared behind him. It was the little robot which stared in awe, its glowing eyes wide and leaves rustling faintly on its head. Holding its stomach as if overwhelmed, it muttered in disbelief, "That man is cooking." Cheon Do-woon lit the fire under the pot, carefully watching the flames rise. As he glanced at the instructions, he frowned slightly, realizing they didn't mention when the fish should be added. Cheon Do-woon stood by the wooden table he had just crafted from a log moments ago. Looking at the pot, he shrugged and decided, "I guess I'll just boil it all together," as he tossed the ingredients in to cook. But as the smell of his cooking loomed over nearby mandragora, their tiny bodies trembling, they twitched uncomfortably, smelling the strange scent. The strange scent drifted through the air, winding its way past the trees as the sunlight filtered through the leaves. The little robot caught the drifting aroma, its sensors twitching as drool leaked from its mouth. "Cooking smell," it murmured, clearly drawn toward the source. "I want to eat it too." "How?" it muttered, its steps following the trail despite knowing it wasn't built for such desires. Its memory stirred, tying the present scent to something once glimpsed long ago. Its body transformed because it saw it in the lab that humans like dogs and humans help if they felt pity. So it transformed into a pitiful-looking dog, whose one leg is injured. Robot let out a soft whine as it approached. Cheon Do-woon, sitting at the table, glanced over with a puzzled expression. He remembered that this mechanical creature has been following him ever since. As he looked at the robot, he wondered if the robot transformed into a dog just to lower his guard, and is it pretending to be hurt on purpose, trying to stir up sympathy? From its actions alone, the MC could tell it seemed like a young creature, one that didn't yet understand much. The little dog barked happily, wagging its tail with innocent excitement. Seeing that MC frowned in thought. How on earth did a creature like this escape from the lab, and make its way all the way to the demon realm? MC looked at the food and said it seemed ready. He asked the little dog if it wanted some too. The dog barked happily in response. Cheon Do-woon picked up his chopsticks and looked at the food, while the little dog stared eagerly at the bowl, drooling with sparkling eyes. Cheon Do-woon looked down at the strange, bubbling dish filled with odd ingredients, and wondered to himself if he should try eating it. He sat at the table, eating from the pot with his chopsticks, while the little dog happily munched on its own share from a plate beside him. As he tasted the food, his eyes widened in surprise, the flavor overwhelming him. Beside him, the little dog tilted its head in confusion, still chewing, while the Cheon Do-woon's thoughts echoed. This taste is... A memory of the past surfaced in his mind. He recalled sitting on the floor with his friends, all gathered around a steaming pot of ramen. Their faces were full of joy as they laughed and chatted. Cheon Do-woon slurped the hot noodles, sweat running down his face. His cheeks flushed, and steam rose around him as he struggled with the heat, but his expression showed pure enjoyment. Cheon Do-woon smiled softly as he tasted the noodles, thinking to himself that this was how it used to taste. In that moment, he remembered the ramen he had eaten when he was just 7 years old. While the sun set behind the mountains, shadows stretched across the forest. From within the trees, Cheon Do-woon's faint voice echoed just one word: delicious. Afterward, Cheon Do-woon stood with his hands on his hips, looking at the dog. He told it that if it was done eating, it could leave since he needed to clean up. The dog then turned and began walking away, while limping on its one foot. Seeing that Cheon Do-woon pointed out that the dog had been limping on its left foot earlier. The dog froze in shock, realizing it had been caught. With a sheepish look, it quickly changed the lead it was limping and walked away, while Cheon Do-woon watched with a knowing smile. Then Cheon Do went to a waterfall. After finishing the dishwashing, he wondered if he should start the laundry next. As he scrubbed clothes by the water, he thought about how he didn't have good memories when it came to pollen. Still, he knew he couldn't keep living in only leather clothes forever. With a small sigh, he reminded himself that he wasn't a caveman. He thought carefully to himself that if he hit the clothes too hard with the stick, they might tear. So, he decided to strike gently while washing them. But despite his earlier thought of being gentle, he ended up striking the clothes with little too much force. The ground cracked, rocks flew, and the impact shook the riverbank, leaving him shocked at what just happened. The stick slammed into the ground with overwhelming force, leaving cracks and debris scattered everywhere. He stared silently at the destruction, speechless at his own strength. He cleared his throat and tried to stay calm. Though one cloth had destroyed, he reassured himself that it was fine, because there was still one more left. But he narrowed his eyes and looked in his side in confusion. This time, That little robot had changed its form into a rock. He wondered to himself why that little robot kept following him around. He remembered that, while he was eating ramen and washing the dishes afterward, the strange little robot appeared again, floating nearby as if it was watching him. Even when he stopped to admire the flowers that looked like forsythia, the little robot appeared once again. It changed its form and came closer, but it never really did anything special, just followed quietly. The little robot, disguised as a log, suddenly froze in surprise when a bee flew close to its face, making it flinch with wide eyes. It panicked as a bee buzzed near it. Terrified, it shouted, "Bee!" and ran away as fast as it could, clearly frightened by the tiny insect. The little robot screamed that it hated bees. Watching its reaction, it seemed like its mental age was no more than that of a child under 5 years old. The little robot spoke in a mechanical and clumsy manner, its words stiff and unnatural, making it clear that it wasn't fully developed in how it communicated. Cheon-du realized that the young chimera had been forced to have knowledge injected into it. Because of this, it showed clumsy behavior and odd reactions, which were common side effects in young chimeras. Cheon-du looked at the flowers and commented, though a bit awkwardly, that the forsythia flowers were pretty. He acted as if he didn't see the little robot. Little robot peeked from behind the flowers, watching shyly. Then something later Cheon-du let out a sigh, realizing that doing laundry was harder than he expected. Still, he held up the clean, shining shirt with a small sense of accomplishment. He looked at the freshly washed shirt in his hands, and felt relieved. At least he had managed to save this one. He noticed the shirt looked a bit too small for him to wear. Since he had washed it so carefully, it felt like a waste. Deciding not to throw it away, he hung it to the side. Then, he thought to himself that it was time to go check on the mandragoras. While he goes to check on them, the little robot, disguised as a rock, stayed silent, only its glowing eyes showing any sign of life. The little robot grabbed the wet shirt, thinking that since the man wore clothes, it should too. The little robot put on the wet shirt and said proudly that it also wore clothes, trying to imitate the man. The little robot happily declaring that it now belonged to him. He stood proudly, glowing with excitement. Golden light surrounded the creature as its form began to change. Shiny, wavy brown hair appeared, glowing beautifully in the transformation. The golden light continued to glow as the transformation went on. From within the shining clothes, a human hand appeared, clenched tightly into a fist. The transformation was complete. The small robot now stood in a full human form, with long brown hair flowing behind and fists resting proudly on its hips. It felt perfect, as if this form was its true self. On the other hand, Cheon-du looked at the little mandragoras in concern. They kept acting weak, their leaves drooping as if they were wilting. Their roots also looked dry, making him wonder why they kept ending up like this. He found it strange, as he was sure he had pulled out all the weeds when preparing the field. While working, he suddenly noticed something unusual and muttered, "What's this?" As he tilled the soil, all sorts of things started coming out of the ground. He realized he should have been gentler while working through it. Shocked, he thought about how he had almost hurt the little mandragoras by mistake. He thought about making a proper vegetable garden in that spot. Estimating the size, he wondered if an area as big as his house would be enough. Just then, he noticed something appear behind him. He looked back and saw a young girl with long, flowing hair peeked out shyly from behind a tree. Her bright golden eyes widened with curiosity as she softly greeted, "Hello." Cheon-du looked surprised, immediately recognizing that it's the little robot. He thought to himself, "This time it's a girl. Is she finally talking to me?" Gathering himself, he responded softly, "Yes, hello there." The little girl looked at the wooden house with hesitation and asked softly if it belonged to him. Cheon-du simply replied with a calm, "Yes." The little girl nervously asked if he was a native of the area. Hearing her question, Cheon-du smirked slightly and thought to himself whether he should tease her a little. Cheon-du said yes and asked her which tribe she belonged to. Surprised and nervous, the little girl stammered, repeating the word tribe in confusion. The girl nervously pointed far away, claiming she came from across the waterfall, a very distant place that he wouldn't be able to find. Cheon-du thought for a moment and asked if she was from the coconut tribe, since they lived near the waterfall. The girl quickly nodded, flustered but determined, and insisted that he was correct. She claimed that she came from the coconut tribe. Cheon-du noticed the outfit and pointed out that it looked like his. The girl quickly explained, flustered, that in her tribe, whoever picks something up owns it, so the clothes were hers now. Cheon-du, amused, simply agreed and told her she could keep it. The girl let out a happy squeal. Cheon-du asked the girl what brought someone from the coconut tribe to this place. The girl, looking nervous, admitted that she had been kicked out of her tribe. Then, gathering her courage, she said she had a request for him. The girl shouted nervously, her face red with determination. I want to live here too. Please. I hope you'll let me stay. She bowed her head deeply, showing her desperation as Cheon-du looked at her in surprise. The girl's eyes widened nervously and she stammered, "Here there are no bugs." Her face showed a mix of worry and desperation as she tried to explain her reason. The girl nervously fiddled with her hands and said softly, "And there's a house too, so it seems safe." She spoke timidly, trying to justify why she wanted to stay. The girl explained shyly, "That's why I want to live here." Hearing this, Cheon-du closed his eyes with a calm expression and thought to himself, so she just needed a place to rest after all. He agreed and said, "All right, but if you want to stay here, you must do your share of work." The girl's face lit up with excitement as she clenched her fists happily. "Understood. Just tell me what to do," she replied eagerly. Cheon-du explained, "First, I need to till the vegetable patch. Can you help with that? I need to make a new home for the mandragoras." The girl eagerly grabbed the tool and declared with confidence that she would handle it, proudly saying she was strong. The girl shouted with determination that she was confident in her strength. With incredible power, she charged forward, tearing up the ground and sending dirt and rocks flying everywhere. Cheon-du watched her run with overwhelming strength, realizing she had no intention of hiding who she really was. He thought to himself that maybe it was because she had only ever lived in a lab, and so she didn't understand how a normal child was supposed to act. Cheon-do introduced himself and asked the girl for her name. She froze for a moment, startled, and nervously repeated the word, "name," as if unsure how to respond. The girl thought to herself that she didn't have a name. She decided she would make a new one, choosing it based on the pretty flower she had once seen. The girl raised her hand proudly and announced with a bright smile, "My name is Kim Nari." Cheon-do tilted his head and asked, "Forsythia?" The girl stomped her foot angrily and shouted, "It's Kim Nari." Then few minutes later little Nari proudly announced that the work was all done. Cheon-do observed and commented that it was finished quickly. A stone fence, carefully made by Cheon-do, surrounded the tilled patch of land. Then he planted the mandragoras there. Little mandragoras jumped around happily with bright smiles, clearly excited and full of energy in their new home. Cheon-do watched them and thought he should have tilled the field more carefully. Meanwhile, Kim Nari stayed quiet, simply observing. Cheon-do suddenly turned his head, sensing something unusual. His expression sharpened as he clearly noticing something that caught his attention. Little Nari suddenly burst into tears, her eyes filled with sorrow. Cheon-do looked at her in surprise and asked why she was crying. Sniffling, she admitted that seeing the mandragoras reminded her of her lost friends, and the memory overwhelmed her with emotion. Cheon-do looked at her with surprise, thinking to himself, "Friends? There's no way she could have had something like that in the lab." He couldn't believe her words, feeling puzzled by what she meant. Just then, little Mari's eyes widened in shock as a loud, terrifying noise echoed around her. A tear rolled down her cheek, and she gasped in fear. Dark shadows spread across the sky, surrounding the area where the small house and vegetable patch stood. Cheon-do calmly told little Nari not to be too surprised, explaining that the frightening noise was just monsters hunting each other, a common sound in this place. Little Nari, trembling and crouched on the ground, nervously admitted that before coming here, she had seen a monster that looked like a chick, and it seemed like several monsters were attacking it. Hearing that, Cheon-do widened his senses and calmly confirmed, "It seems so." Little Nari trembled as she listened, her voice filled with worry. She said it sounded like the creature was in pain and must be hurting. She added that it seemed to have been bitten. Cheon-do, standing calmly beside her, explained without emotion that the creature would soon be eaten, for this was the demon realm after all. He asked her perhaps she saved that monster. Hearing that, little Nari clutched her head. Trembling, she shook her head and cried out in despair, insisting that she couldn't save monsters. Seeing her reaction, Cheon-do wondered if the side effects of the brainwashing command were still affecting her. It seemed she couldn't move according to her own will. Cheon-do thought to himself that he needed to be careful with his words so they wouldn't sound like commands. Smiling gently, he said to the little Nari, "If you help, the monster might survive. Do you want to go and take a look?" Hearing this, the little Mari's eyes widened in surprise, clearly moved by his words. She shouted, "I'll be back," as she launched herself high into the sky, leaving Cheon-do watching her soar upward with determination. On the other hand, huge insect-like monsters with sharp wings and fierce eyes rushed forward aggressively, their movements fast and threatening as they filled the battlefield with danger. Their target, a small, fluffy creature, lay on the ground, weak and injured, its body trembling in fear. One of the giant insect monsters struck at it with a sharp claw, aiming to finish it off as the helpless creature cried out softly in pain. Just then, little Nari rushed in, shouting, Don't torment it! She struck the giant insect monster with all her strength, knocking it back. The small, fluffy creature on the ground looked up in shock as she defended it bravely. Little Nari clenched her fist tightly, determination shining in her teary eyes. With a firm resolve, she thought to herself, I will save it. A memory of past flashed in front of her eyes. In a dimly lit hallway, two children whispered nervously. Pointing at little Robot 1 asked if she had taken first place again in the rank battle. The other, sweating with worry, muttered that if this continued, they would be used for dangerous experiments with high chances of failure. This made those children angry, and they took little Robot's small, yellow toy and torn it. They throws it on the ground, with tufts of its fluffy feathers scattered around. The other children shouted angrily, Let us live too, if only you weren't here. They ganged up, kicking and beating the small robot. Curled up on the floor, the robot thought sadly, Why, I just did as I was told. The small robot trembled. In its mind, it cried out, It hurts. Please stop. Little Nari could not save her toy there, so this time she have divided to save this little white creature. Little Nari shouted with all her strength. Stop! Her cry echoed as the ground shook. Green liquid splattered, and energy burst outward. The force of her will pushed against the chaos, demanding everything to come to a halt. She clenched her fist tightly, her eyes burning with anger and pain. She shouted that many people tormenting just one person was wrong. Her voice filled with the weight of her emotions as energy flared around her. Little Nari shouted with all her strength, declaring that ganging up on one person was a bad thing. With fierce determination she charged forward, her energy bursting out wildly as she struck against the attackers. On the other hand, Cheon-du knelt on the ground, gently touching the small mandragoras on the soil, giving them energy. Looking at them closely, he asked softly, Is it delicious? Just then, little Nari shouted loudly, calling out, Mister! Cheon-du, startled, quickly turned his head to ask her, but it froze mid-word. Little Nari's eyes filled with tears as she clutched the small creature in her arms. Panicking, she cried out. Little Nari held the small, injured creature tightly in her arms. Its eyes were swirling as if it had lost consciousness, and faint marks and bruises covered its body. Cheon-du tried to calm himself down, but then froze in shock. That tiny creature reminded him of the white monster with fiery eyes and a burning presence that he skinned before. He stared at the creature, a strange feeling creeping over him. It seemed familiar. Little Nari clutched the small creature in her arms, her face filled with tears and panic. She looked up desperately and cried out, calling Chen-du uncle, asking what they should do. With trembling words, she explained that the creature wouldn't wake up, her fear and helplessness clear in her voice. She cried out that it didn't look good, and asked fearfully if it was dying. Cheon-du walked toward her calmly, and told her that they should take a closer look. He slowly reached out his hand, blue energy swirling gently around his fingers as he prepared to use his power. He placed his glowing hand gently on the creature, blue energy flowing around his fingers. After checking, he sighed in relief and thought that, fortunately, the wound didn't seem to be fatal. He realized that every monster's magic carried a unique history within it, something that made each one different from the other. He noticed that the creature had shrunk in size, and its color had become lighter, but he was certain it was still the same immortal-type monster from before, now weak and barely conscious in the girl's hands. Cheon-du wondered why the creature had shrunk so much, and if its way of healing was different from his own. Meanwhile, the little Nari, holding the small creature in her arms, anxiously asked if it was truly dying. Cheon-du explained that the creature wasn't dying, but simply malnourished. He noted that it had shrunk because it hadn't been able to get enough food. Little Nari repeated the word, malnourished, in surprise, trying to understand. Cheon-du explained that he had given the creature some mana, so if they left it alone, it would recover on its own. Hearing that little Nari looked down at the creature quietly, her face filled with concern. She remembered her past where two children were very angry at her, and they destroyed her small, worn-out stuffed toy. Looking at that small creature, she remembered that She held up the small, weak creature with worry in her eyes. She pleaded that if they left it alone, it would surely die. Pointing out its condition, she compared it to a rice cake, limp and lifeless in her hands. Little Nari clutched the small creature tightly to her chest, her eyes filled with determination. She asked if she could raise it, saying she wanted to take care of it. Nervously, she promised that she would train it properly, and feed it well too. Her voice trembled as she asked if that would be okay. Cheon-du with a calm smile, and remarked that the creature might grow quite large in the future. Little Nari quickly insisted that she would only feed the creature a little. Cheon-du then allowed her to do as she wished. Hearing this, little Nari's eyes lit up with joy, and she asked in disbelief if he really meant it. Cheondu said yes, and suggested that she could let the creature roam around the yard and even guard the house. While they were talking suddenly, the small creature slowly opened its eyes, looking weak and confused. In a dazed voice, it wondered to itself, "Where am I?" And the next little creature suddenly jolted in shock as it noticed Cheondu standing in front. The small creature's eyes widened in alarm as it recognized the him. With a trembling voice, it thought to itself, "It's the one who took my skin." Back then, hearing the creature's voice, little Nari looked down. Her eyes lit up with excitement as she hugged the small creature tightly. Meanwhile, the creature's face twisted in fear and shock, sweat dripping down as it realized the danger it was in. Little Nari lifted the round creature high into the air with excitement, shouting that it was awake and even making dove-like noises. Meanwhile, the creature, sweating nervously, was shocked and confused. Wondering why a girl was in the demon world, little Nari hugged the little creature tightly with hearts in her eyes, happily shouting that it was finally alive. The creature, however, struggled and begged to be let go. Cheondu, watching this scene unfold, looked confused. The small creature screamed angrily, demanding to be let go. Hearing that, Cheondu's eyes widened in surprise as he realized he could actually understand what the creature was saying. Then something later, little Nari proudly announced that the small creature's treatment was complete. The round creature, now wrapped tightly in bandages, groaned in frustration, saying it couldn't move at all. With excitement sparkling in her eyes, little Nari looked at her uncle and told him she had already picked out a name for it. The little creature angrily shouted to be let out. Ignoring its protests, little Nari happily suggested naming it Coo, since it made cooing sounds like a pigeon. Cheondu, carrying heavy logs on his shoulder, looked over and simply said that the name wasn't bad. The small creature angrily complained about being named without permission. It reminded them that it already had a name of its own. Little Nari, however, simply looked at it curiously, unfazed by its protest. She poured a bucket of water over the small creature, thinking it was thirsty because it kept making noises. She believed giving it more water would help it stop crying, but little Nari panicked as she saw the creature puffing up like a blowfish and asked her uncle what to do. The little creature weakly begged for the water to stop. Watching this, Cheondu realized that Nari doesn't understand that creature's language. He calmly told her that the creature had already had enough water. Little Nari suddenly realized the creature might be hungry. With excitement, she shouted that she would go find some food for it, and quickly ran off. After she left, Cheondu noticed that many small tasks were piling up. To stay organized, he decided it would be best to build a storage cabinet. He measured the logs, and thought to himself that the cabinet should be about this size. It didn't need to be too big, just enough to serve its purpose. With his hand blade, he tries to cut the log, but it broke in pieces, making Cheondu paused in surprise, not expecting it to cut so easily. He stood puzzled and muttered to himself, wondering what went wrong, since he had built it the same way he had made the table and chair. The little creature, wrapped in bandages, clicked its tongue, and explained that the wood was different. It pointed out that the one in front of him was soft wood, easy to break. Hearing that, Cheondu realized that wood strength varied by type and asked about it. The creature, surprised, said it was obvious, and couldn't believe he didn't know. Curious, Cheondu then asked which color wood was the strongest. The creature confidently began to say that the strongest wood was obviously the red one, but then it suddenly froze in shock, its eyes widening in surprise. The creature panicked, and asked if the man had just understood what it said. Cheondu, deep in thought, muttered to himself about red wood. Ignoring him, the creature grew cautious, and thought to itself that although it seemed impossible, it should try just in case. With glowing eyes, it decided to attempt reading the man's mind. The creature activated its ability, and a glowing light surrounded it. It used telepathy to read thoughts directly. But Cheondu Chimera power activated and looked through the whole forest carefully. But no matter how hard he searched, he couldn't see any red wood. He wondered if the red wood might only grow in a different place. Meanwhile, the small creature was shocked. Realizing that Cheondu had blocked its telepathy instantly, it thought to itself that it was even more than just blocking. It nervously asked in disbelief if Cheondu could actually hear its thoughts. Cheondu explained that it wasn't exactly like hearing a voice. Instead, the words simply appeared in his mind. Then, with a serious look, he added that there was something even more important to discuss. He pointed out that it was even stranger for a monster to understand human speech. The little creature froze, startled, and stammered, "That's..." Seeing his hesitation, Cheondu realized that the creature must be one of the rare intelligent monsters that are born against all odds. Though he had heard of such beings before, this was his first time seeing one in person. He looked closely, and asked calmly if they had met before. The creature said yes, and admitted that it had really wanted to see him again. Surprised, Cheondu asked why it felt that way. The creature said that it didn't matter why, but Cheondu had saved its life. Because of that, it wanted to repay him and help if they ever met again. Hearing that, Cheondu realized that back then, he had removed the poison, which allowed the creature's immortal core to survive. That was why it managed to live. He asked if the creature could help him now. Surprised, the little creature nervously responded, asking if he meant right at that moment. The little creature's eye widened, showing its nervousness and hesitation at the Cheondu's request. But the small creature agreed with determination. It spread its wings and declared that it would guide Cheondu to the place where the red trees grew. Meanwhile, inside the forest, little Nari, who goes to get some food for small creatures, screamed in fear, running desperately as fireballs blazed behind her. With tears in her eyes, she cried out for it to go away, shouting that she hated the lab. Little Nari ran as flames burned behind her. Tears streamed down her face as she cried out in pain, shouting that it was too hot. Suddenly fell face down on the ground, and that fireball hit the wall in front, and a massive explosion erupted in front of her, flames and debris scattering everywhere. Seeing that, little Nari trembled in fear, tears streaming down her face. She thought the lab had come to capture her. Panic filled her mind as she cried, terrified of the flames, admitting she hated fire more than anything. On the other hand, a person held a device showing a radar with a red dot. Watching it closely, they confirmed without doubt that she was the mechanical creature, the one capable of freely changing its shape. A tall man with long hair walked calmly through the raging flames, his expression cold and serious. Fire surrounded him, but he seemed completely unfazed, holding burning energy in his hand as he stepped forward with authority. The man stared ahead with a cold, serious expression. Surrounded by flames, he admitted to himself that it didn't feel right to attack a child, but he was prepared to do it anyway. The man's eyes burned with determination as flames swirled in his hand. He shouted fiercely, explaining that his life was at stake, hoping the child would understand why he had to fight. The man thrust his hand forward, unleashing a massive wave of fire. Flames roared violently, rushing toward little Nari, who looked tiny and helpless in the distance. The man shouted that this was the end. As flames rushed forward, little Nari's eyes widened in fear, tears streaming down her face, her body frozen in shock as she realized the danger closing in. Just then, with small creature perched on his shoulder, Cheondu appeared right in front of little Nari, stopping the fire with his bare hands. Behind him, frightened little Nari wiped away her tears. Cheondu thought to himself that all he had wanted was to finish building the cabinet and eat in peace. But now he was forced into this fight. The small creature's eyes glowed with determination as it used its telekinesis, and told Cheondu it would reveal the location of the trees later. For now, saving the child was the top priority. Cheondu's eyes glowed with determination, ready to act. Kim Nari sat trembling on the ground, clutching her head as she muttered for the fire to go away. Seeing her, Cheondu realized she is terrified of the flames, and clearly not in a stable state of mind. He calmly said to the small creature that they should put out the fire first. The small creature on his shoulder agreed, angry at the thought of someone bullying a child, calling it the act of a scumbag. Seeing Cheondu, the man cloaked in flames glared fiercely and demanded, "You're clearly not some caveman. Whose side are you on?" He narrowed his eyes and added, "You're after the mechanical creature too, aren't you? Then listen carefully. I'll only say this once. Leave while you still can." Both Cheondu and that fire guy stood across from each other, tension filling the air. One was wreathed in flames, while the other remained calm and steady. Breaking the silence, the Cheondu spoke firmly, "You talk too much." This made the fire guy, engulfed in flames, roared in fury. He shouted that his opponent was getting cocky, his rage spilling out with the fire around him. Then, with gritted teeth, he growled not to ruin the moment. Fire guy, consumed by fury and flames, shouted loudly for his opponent to get lost. With fire blazing around him, he slammed his hands into the ground, sending out a powerful fiery attack. Seeing that Cheondu stood firm with a serious expression, his eyes sharp with focus, he raised his hand and pointed forward, a bright blue light shining from his fingers. Cheondu pointed forward, releasing a powerful burst of blue energy that clashed against that fire guy's fiery attack. Cheondu's attack created a massive explosion of light and force as it hit the mountain behind the fire guy. An explosion erupted with a blinding light, shocking the fire guy. His eyes widened in disbelief as he muttered in confusion, "What the?" The fire guy's face twisted in shock as debris rained down around him. His eyes widened, and sweat ran down his face as he gasped in disbelief, too stunned to speak. Only a cry of alarm escaped him. As the dust and debris settled inside the massive crater, Cheon-do asked little Nari gently if she was okay. Little Nari replied she was fine now. She wiped her tears, her voice soft with relief. She said that uncle had put out the fire, feeling safer now. Looking at Kim Nari, Cheon-do spoke calmly. He told her that whenever she felt scared, she should face it directly and defeat the fear itself. Meanwhile, the fire guy lay battered and motionless on the ground. Cheon-do grabbed the fire guy by the hair and said firmly that when they woke up, they should knock it off, saying that he swung up that fire guy into the air. But just as he held the enemy up by their hair, paused, his eyes widening in surprise as he realized something was off. Cheon-do looked back and saw that the fire guy lay on the ground and his head now bald. Cheon-do looked at him in confusion and exclaimed, "What the heck is this?" Looking at the fire guy's bald head, Cheon-do wondered if he had always been bald. The small creature sitting on little Nari's head was very annoyed and called the fire guy a little brat. Even little Nari looked at him with wide eyes, clearly confused, as the sunlight reflected off the smooth surface of a shiny head, revealing it to be completely bald. Little Nari quietly muttered the word, "bald," in surprise. She burst into laughter, holding her stomach and tearing up from how hard she was laughing. She found the bald head hilarious and shouted that being bald was funny. Little Nari laughed loudly, calling the fire guy Baldy. She said she wasn't scared of him anymore. Hearing this, the Cheon-do looked at her in silence. He was confused because while he was fighting that fire guy, he realized that the opponent was not strong enough to defeat little Nari. Just then the small eyes glowed brightly as it prepared to use its power. It explained that this would make everything clear. The ability, called mental resonance, allowed him to look into another person's memories. Suddenly Cheon-do's eyes also glowed with a golden light as the power flowed through him. Little creature's ability not only allowed it to look into memories, but also to share those memories with others. In little Nari's memories, Cheon-do saw a dark room. There a man in a lab coat stood before a glowing screen, his posture tense as he leaned on the table. A low, unsettling laugh escaped him, echoing through the room. The man's glasses glowed brightly, hiding his eyes as he grinned with a twisted smile. His expression was filled with a sinister excitement. A small slime creature trembled nervously, its round eyes showing fear as it shifted on the floor. It was little Nari when she was just made. Watching her reaction, the man remarked that it seemed to be dodging him now, and noted that the slime had finally started to develop a sense of self. The man stretched out his hand, blue flames burning around his fingers. His voice was cold and commanding as he called out to the slime, telling it to come closer. The man spoke in a cold, dismissive tone, saying there was nothing to fear. To him, this was just another durability test, nothing more. A loud scream echoed as that man burned Miss Little Nari with fire. Seeing all that, Cheon-do finally understood everything. He gently placed his hand on little Nari's head and praised her, saying she did well. Little Nari looked up at him in confusion, not fully understanding. Cheon-do thought to himself that trauma doesn't disappear so easily, but perhaps this was the first step toward healing. Then looking at that bald guy, Cheon-do wondered what they should do about him. Little creature tapped the bald guy's head, checking if he's awake. Suddenly, little Nari got an idea. Little Nari stood proudly with her hands on her hips. Stars sparkled around her as she announced with confidence that she had a great idea. Then few minutes later, that bald man was tied by ropes, was held down a waterfall. Water surged powerfully, making his coat and boots were soaked. Seeing him, little Nari shouted excitedly that if he got wet, his fire would go out. And now the bald uncle wasn't scary anymore. The bald man stood there, soaked and stunned, water dripping from his face. He admitted with frustration that this wasn't the reason he came to the demon world. When little Nari saw that bald man had awakened, she angrily pointed at the bald under the waterfall and called him a bad bald uncle. The soaked man clenched his fists in frustration, thinking to himself in annoyance. Meanwhile, Cheon-do nearby reminded little Nari not to judge people based only on their looks. Little Nari smirked mischievously, while Cheon-do calmly held a pot with a gentle smile. Watching her reaction, he thought to himself that maybe she would recover faster than he had expected. Then Cheon-do crouched by the river, filling a pot with water. The little creature flew nearby, watching him closely and asking what he was doing. Calmly, Cheon-do replied that he was getting water to make ramen. Hearing that, Kim Nari shouted with excitement, declaring that uncle's fish ramen was the best. Cheon-do glanced at her with a faint smile and asked in disbelief, "Really?" Cheon-do asked if the coconut tribe also ate fish ramen. Flustered, Kim Nari quickly raised her fists and shouted that they did, insisting that the coconut tribe loved ramen. Meanwhile, Water splashed on that bald guy. Water dripped down the man's face as he narrowed his eyes. From his sharp gaze, he judged that Cheon-do was at least an A-plus class hunter. He thought to himself that Cheon-do might be even stronger, just hiding his true ability. Meanwhile, Kim Nari splashed into the water with her legs kicking, shouting that she would catch the fish. Beside her, Cheon-do calmly held a pot, watching her. Looking at him, the bald man thought to himself that Cheon-do was probably a reclusive hunter living off the grid. Meanwhile, Cheon-do looked at the water and muttered that he would need more if he was cooking for 3. Seeing them preparing to make ramen frustrated, bald guy thought that catching someone and then sitting down to eat ramen, even for the demon world. This situation felt completely wrong and messed up. Suddenly, little Nari burst out of the water with a fierce expression, holding up 2 large, sharp-toothed fish in her hands, while another clung to her head. With excitement, she shouted proudly to her uncle that she had caught a fish. Cheon-do told little Nari to give him just 1 fish, and release the rest back into the water. Seeing that fish, that bald guy got shocked. Little Nari quickly agreed, and urged him to hurry so she could toss it in. The bald man stared nervously at the strange fish, sweat running down his face. He wondered what these creatures were, and worried that using one would only make the broth smell terrible. Little Nari dropped the strange fish into the pot filled with water, causing it to splash. Watching this, the bald man grew more uneasy, wondering why Cheon-do was using so much water in the first place. Frustrated, the bald man wondered if they even knew how ramen was supposed to be made. Meanwhile, little Nari happily ran forward with small creature sitting on her head, cheering that it was ramen time and that she was excited. Cheon-do calmly followed behind, holding the pot of water. Bald man suddenly shouted for them to wait. Kim Nari stopped in her tracks. Cheon-do also stopped behind, looking slightly confused. The bald man struggled in the rushing water, looking desperate. He asked if they could finally let him down. With frustration in his voice, he shouted that he would cook the meal himself. And then, few minutes later, the bald man stood at a wooden table under a spotlight, placing a packet of ramen on it. To some, ramen was just food. But as he carefully opened the packet with trembling hands, he thought differently. For him, at that moment, it wasn't just ramen, it was life or death. Cheon-do and little Nari, along with the small creature, sat nearby with dark expressions, silently watching, their red eyes glowing with hunger and anticipation. The bald man reminded himself, ramen must be made with sincerity. He decided to stick to the basics, since he didn't know anything fancy anyway. The bald man stood in front of a pot, focused and serious. He trusted his instincts to decide the amount of water, since he was cooking 3 servings. He added the noodles and soup base into the boiling water, knowing it had to cook for exactly 4 minutes and 30 seconds. With his heartbeat steady at 60 per minute, he decided to count 270 beats to track the perfect time. As the seconds passed, he concentrated deeply, his heartbeats guiding him. Finally, when the time was right, he lifted the noodles high into the air, shouting his technique. Air shower. It was a crucial step. Exposing noodles to air, like that, adds that perfect chewy texture in noodles. Sweating but determined, the bald man thought how kimchi would have made the dish complete, but reminded himself that this was the demon world. Still, he smiled, knowing he gave it his best. The ramen was finished, and he had no regrets. The pot of noodles gleamed, labeled as Nam-gi's sincerity. Ramen. It had 90 flavor scored, 24 carbs, 18 protein, 20 calcium, and 20 fat. The bald man carefully served the ramen, offering it to the others, and asking them to give it a try. Little Nari looked surprised, noting that it felt different from the uncle's ramen. Cheon-do agreed, and prepared to taste it. Cheon-do took a bite, saying he would see how it tasted. Soon, the 3 of them, including the small creature, sat at the table together, eating the ramen. As they tasted it, their eyes widened in shock. Cheon-do, the girl, and the small creature all realized something at the same time. This taste was special. They were overwhelmed, as if transported to another world. Well, basically they were in another world, but it felt completely different world. They thought to themselves that this was not just food. This was the true taste of sincerity. Little Nari's face lit up with joy as she exclaimed how delicious it was. The small creature chirped, asking if humans ate such food all the time. Cheon-do smiled, admitting even he was impressed, before suggesting they eat first. After the meal, the small creature lay on the table, completely full and exhausted, letting out a satisfied sound. Cheon-do also placed his chopsticks on the table after eating. The bald man laughed nervously and asked if the food suited their taste. Cheon-do, little Nari, and the small creature had already finished eating, their bowls completely empty. Cheon-do stayed quiet for a moment. Then, with a serious look, he told the man to name his price. The bald man was shocked and confused. Cheon-do explained that the meal was far too good to eat for free. He insisted that the bald man ask for something in return, and if it was within his ability, he would grant it. Surprised, the bald man asked if he really meant it. When Cheon-do confirmed, the bald man dropped to the ground, bowing deeply, and shouted for him to teach him. The man revealed his name, Hunter Nam-gi, and begged to be trained. He declared that he wanted to become strong like Cheon-do. Cheon-do looked confused, asking why he was being called that, and what Nam meant by teach. Nam-gi, still bowing, praised Cheon-do as the strongest hunter he had ever met. He assumed Cheon-do must be here for a long-term mission, judging by his house. Desperate, Nam-gi tried to convince him further. He claimed he could cook many other dishes and even had certifications, though he admitted he didn't really. He shouted that his father owned a fried chicken shop, and that he could make amazing fried chicken. That was true. Pushing harder, Nam-gi pointed out how troublesome it must be to pass through the gate constantly for supplies and clothes. He offered to be Cheon-do's runner, handling errands for him. Finally, he promised to even pay any price Cheon-do wanted in exchange for lessons. The bald man knelt down before Cheon-do, his voice filled with desperation. He begged for the chance to train under him, declaring his dream of reaching A-class. Cheon-do, however, remained calm and asked only one question. He wanted to know the bald man's true reason for attacking little Nari. Was it really just for the bounty? The man stammered, confused, asking if Cheon-do meant the robot. Before he could finish, Cheon-do quickly whispered that they should stick with the Coconut Tribe story and play along. Realizing his mistake, the man nervously agreed. Lowering his head, tears forming in his eyes, he admitted that it was personal and difficult to explain. But soon his voice grew louder with emotion, as he cried out that he didn't care about rewards or little Nari at all. What mattered to him was passing the hunter rank test, nothing else. Cheon-do studied him for a moment before giving a simple command. He told the man to stand. Startled, the man asked why, but Cheon-do stood up, his body glowing faintly with energy. He explained that after enjoying a good meal, sparring was the least he could offer in return. The bald man's face lit up with gratitude as he bowed deeply. He thanked Cheon-do with all his heart. Just then, the little Nari suddenly spoke up. She slammed her small hands on the table and demanded to spar instead. Cheon-do turned to her and asked if she was certain. With fiery determination in her eyes, she recalled the lesson he had once given her. When you're afraid, knock it out. Holding on to those words, she declared that she wanted to face the challenge herself. Hearing that, the bald man chuckled nervously, trying to lighten the mood. He reminded little Nari that while Cheon-do was certainly strong, he himself wasn't exactly weak either. But little Nari's piercing gaze and unwavering silence made it clear. She wasn't going to back down. Cheon-do looked at Nam-gi-seok and asked if he could break the giant black stone in front of them. Nam-gi-seok froze in shock and quickly explained that the stone was obsidianite, a material said to be many times harder than diamonds. He nervously laughed, saying it was impossible to break unless one was at least an A-class hunter. But before he could finish his words, the stone suddenly shattered with a loud explosion, leaving him wide-eyed and trembling in disbelief. Nam-gi-seok froze, his face pale with shock as sweat trickled down his cheek. As he tried to process what just happened, Kim Nari stood up, her small body glowing with energy. She was the one who used her power to break that obsidian. With a fierce expression, she pointed her hand at him and declared with confidence, "Baldy uncle, come out. Let's spar." Nam-gi was known as a natural awakener, once considered a highly promising hunter. Unlike most people who awakened their powers in their late teens, he first awakened at just 8 years old. This made him an exceptionally rare case. With talent and relentless effort, he grew at an astonishing speed. Before even reaching the age of 20, he was already promoted to a B+ rank hunter. His rise was meteoric, and fame quickly followed. During those days, he dreamed of becoming the greatest hunter, and it felt like nothing was missing from his life. But there was one flaw that haunted him: his hair. While others his age were just beginning to awaken, he started losing his hair far too early. What began as thinning at the crown in his early 20s soon turned into a receding hairline by his mid-20s, forming a deep M shape. The once brilliant hunter, who carried such promise, now found himself staring at his own reflection in despair, clutching his thinning hair and crying out. Nam-gi tried everything to stop his hair from falling out. He went through countless treatments and visited every clinic he could find. Desperate, he told the doctor that he had money and could pay for another transplant, but the doctor only shook his head and said it would just fall out again, telling him to give up. Hearing that Nam-gi was left in despair and could only cry, despite his good looks and natural talent, nothing worked. Once, he had been someone who shined brighter than anyone else, but over time, that light began to fade. His career as a hunter also slowed down. In one test, he was disqualified, and people remarked that so much for him becoming A rank. With his dreams slipping away, Namgi sank deeper into frustration. At home, surrounded by bottles and trash, he lay on the couch watching TV. Then one day, a program featured Dr. Han Myung-do from the Hanbit Institute. The host asked him about an unusual case from his research. The doctor explained that liquid metal was a rare material, even in the demon world, but someone had accidentally spilled it on their head. By chance, it made their hair grow back. The doctor then revealed himself. His hair was full and long again. Smiling, he proudly announced that he was nearly 90 years old, yet thanks to liquid metal, his hair had returned. Seeing that Namgi was shocked, lying on the floor, he couldn't believe what he just heard. He gets very angry, asking what kind of bullshit is this. But because he could, the reporters laughed and asked the scientist if he would create a cure for baldness next. Hearing that, Namgi's eyes widened with sudden hope, his heart racing. But the doctor only laughed it off, saying that the mysterious demon world reminded him of how little they understood. He spoke about serving humanity as an awakener, creating more mechanical beings, and aiming for Korea's first major award. Hearing this, Namgi clenched his fists. Why? He thought. Why chase awards when a real cure could change lives? He screamed in anger, smashing a bottle. Just make a cure for baldness. That would actually help humanity. But it was no use. No one heard him. Then a few days later, he read shocking news. Hanbit Institute's mechanical creature had accidentally fallen into the demon world. Seeing that, Namgi's eyes lit up because he knows that in the demon world, there were no rules, only survival. That meant whoever found it could claim it. Determined, Namgi swore to himself that he will find it and will dump it on his head, noting that no matter what, it will be his. And now here he was, thrown to the ground, his face covered in dirt. Shocked, he muttered in disbelief, unsure of what had just happened. He realized he had been defeated once again. Little Nari, standing before him, celebrated cheerfully, while Cheon-do shook his head, remarking that Namgi couldn't land even a single clean hit. While working with wood, Cheon-do warned Namgi sternly that if he kept performing this poorly, he wouldn't be allowed to take shuttle duty. Panicking, Namgi quickly promised to do better, begging for another chance. Cheon-do proudly admired the cabinet he had just finished building. It felt strong and sturdy, likely because it was crafted from redwood. The small creature by his side agreed, noting it would last a long time. From a distance, Cheon-do then looked at Namgi, who had been beaten earlier. He couldn't help but think that the Namgi had guts. Despite being beaten all day, he still stood tall and full of energy. Clenching his fists, Namgi summoned flames in his hands. Seeing that, Cheon-do wondered why Namgi seemed so full of energy. Then a thought crossed his mind. Maybe it was because the Namgi had taken off his wig. Fueled by fiery determination, Namgi shouted, asking little Nari for another match, his flames burning brightly as he prepared to fight once more. Small creature, observing the scene, admitted that Namgi's flame ability wasn't bad, but if he couldn't even beat a kid, it wasn't impressive. Hearing that, Cheon-do calmly pointed out that Kim Nari wasn't an ordinary child, Namgi charged forward with flames trailing behind him, shouting that this time he would surely win. Little Nari stood her ground confidently and told him to bring it on. With fiery force, the Namgi slammed down, creating a massive explosion, but to his shock, little Nari's body suddenly melted into a liquid form, slipping away unharmed. Namgi stared wide-eyed, stunned, and muttered in disbelief that she had liquefied. Before he could react further, little Nari reappeared behind him and kicked him into the stomach with overwhelming strength, sending Namgi flying crashing into the wall behind. The impact shook the area, leaving Namgi buried in rubble of the wall while little Nari landed gracefully. She stood proudly, laughing, and declared that she was no longer afraid of fire, thanks to him. Lying in the crater, Namgi let out a tired laugh. He wondered if this was the limit of a lifelong B rank, admitting to himself that he had run out of techniques. But then, determination sparked in his eyes. Refusing to give up, he pushed himself back to his feet. He told himself he would stand again, because where else could a washed-up man like him experience such a battle? Namgi, the man who didn't know how to quit, rose once more. Smiling through the pain, he shouted for just one more match against Kim Nari, refusing to back down. But Namgi suddenly felt something warm drip from his nose. Startled, he touched his face and realized he had a nosebleed. Seeing that, Cheon-do asked him how long it had been since Namgi arrived in the demon world. Namgi thought for a moment before replying that, "Today makes day 9. Hearing that, Cheon-do's expression grew serious. He warned that at Namgi's current level, Staying in the demon world any longer might kill him because of the demonic energy. Namgi hesitated, but eventually admitted that it made sense. Still, Cheon-du looked at him with confidence, and told Namgi that he saw A-rank potential in him, encouraging him to give his best. Shocked, Namgi pointed at himself in disbelief, but Namgi lowered his head, confessing that he had failed the A-rank test for 6 years straight. He explained that most people considered it hopeless after failing the same test for 3 years, and there had never been a case in history of someone succeeding after so many failures. But Cheon-du disagreed. He told Namgi that he still had room to grow, and that his mana hole wasn't fully developed yet. With a firm voice, he told him not to give up. Hearing those words, Namgi's eyes welled up with tears. Overwhelmed, Cheon-du gave him one last piece of advice, telling him to cleanse the demonic energy properly once he returned. Nam bowed deeply, his heart burning with determination. He shouted his thanks, vowing to give it his all. As Nam's voice echoed, Cheon-du thought to himself that he will make Namgi into an A-rank laborer, that is. Then few minutes later, Namgi, carrying supplies, asked if there was anything else they needed. He mentioned that they were out of ramen. At the sound of the word, the little Nari's eyes lit up, and she jumped happily. Cheon-du nodded calmly, saying that was enough for now. Namgi with the backpack agreed, and said he would go grab some. Before leaving, little Nari wished Namgi safety, while he shouted back that he would definitely win next time. Suddenly, he asked the Cheon-du if he had seen his wig. Cheon-du shook his head, and replied that he hadn't. With a nervous laugh, Namgi decided to head back anyway, still wondering where it had gone. Once he disappeared, little creature looked uneasy. It asked if things would really be okay. Cheon-du turned to it, puzzled, and asked what it meant. Little creature explained that if Namgi betrayed them, it could be dangerous, and he might even bring other hunters. Cheon-du reminded it that it could read memories and asked what it thought. Little creature thought back and recalled how serious the Namgi had been about getting stronger. Even his baldness was genuine. At the very least, his sincerity made him likable. Smiling faintly, Cheon-du admitted that Namgi might actually be worth investing in. Hearing him talking, little Nari asked her uncle if could really understand what Ku, the small creature on her head, was saying. Cheon-du casually replied that he could, in fact, understand Ku's speech. Then both of them went inside the house. Cheon-du proudly showed the cabinet he had built, explaining that he had done it with Ku's advice. The house looked tidier now, though little Nari pointed out that it still felt a bit dark inside. Hearing that, Cheon-du paused, then asked if she wanted a window. Without waiting long, he used his sword-like hand and cut into the wall, but suddenly sparks stared flying beside him until a clean opening appeared. It was little Nari who used her eyes' lasers to create a small window for herself. She cheered happily that brightness was better. Cheon-du simply nodded in satisfaction, but he reminded her that at night they would still need a proper light source. Curious, little Nari asked how they could get one. Cheon-du explained about glowstones, crystals that shined in the dark. A few of them on the ceiling would keep the room bright. Hearing that, little creature Ku frowned and asked if he even knew where to find them. Calmly, Cheon-du answered that glowstones could be found in volcanic zones. Hearing that, Ku's expression grew serious. Volcanic zones, after all, were some of the most dangerous areas for hunters. And there was more thing. Ku lowered his head, his voice heavy as he admitted that the volcanic zone was where he came from. The thought of returning made him uneasy. Hearing that, Cheon-du couldn't understand why Ku looked so gloomy. After all, going back home should have been a good thing. Curious, little Nari hugged Ku tightly and asked her uncle what it was saying, noting that Ku's tone sounded strange, almost upset. Hearing that, Ku frowned, realizing little Nari was sharper than expected, noticing things that others might miss. Cheon-du told her that Ku was worried about them going to the volcanic zone. He suggested going alone, telling little Nari and Ku to stay behind, but little Nari crossed her arms and refused. She declared that she wanted to go too, saying she wasn't afraid of fire anymore. Her determination surprised Cheon-du. He hadn't expected her to overcome her fear so quickly. When he asked Ku, Ku also agreed to go. It admitted it had unfinished matters to deal with in the volcanic zone. Seeing their resolve, Cheon-du finally smiled and agreed. He told them all to prepare, but first, he would craft special gear to withstand the volcanic zone, and use the spider monster's power. At the same time, in the volcanic zone, the ground trembled as the volcano erupted, spitting out fire and smoke. From within the thick smoke, a pair of glowing eyes appeared, sharp and menacing. A low rumble echoed as a massive shadow began to rise, shaking the entire volcanic zone. Something terrifying had awakened from the heart of the volcano where Cheon-du, little Nari and Ku are headed next. The group entered the volcanic region, one of the 3 most dangerous places in the demon world. Hunters usually avoided it because of the flying volcanic ash, toxic gases, and the heavy demonic energy in the air that made breathing difficult. Ku explained that very little was known about this place in the human world. As he spoke, he noticed little Nari happily playing around the lava, treating it like a game. Ku could only stare in disbelief at her reckless behavior, asking what that child was doing right now. Cheon-do acted normal, and told Ku that she was just playing with fire. Ku remarked that it was normal for little Nari since she was originally a mechanical creature, but then turned to Cheon-do, wondering how he was perfectly fine in such a deadly place. Cheon-do revealed that he was a chimera hunter. Ku had guessed that much, but asked him why he looked so human since chimera hunters normally didn't. Cheon-do told him that he used to look like that too, but after regenerating, he had ended up with a human appearance again. Cheon-do then asked if Ku was truly comfortable being with them, reminding him that he was still a monster, and hunters usually hated monsters. But Ku simply answered that it wasn't so bad. He said it was nice to have someone to talk to, and Cheon-do didn't seem like bad people. Hearing that, Cheon-do gave a small smile, saying that's a relief. Then little Nari returned to them. Her small feet stepped on the hot surface, but she didn't seem bothered because of the custom-made shoes that Cheon-do made for her. Little Nari called out, asking if Cheon-do was speaking with Gu again, and eagerly said she wanted to talk with Gu too. Cheon-do reminded her that earlier she had asked about his identity, hinting he was about to explain. Excitedly, little Nari declared that since Cheon-do was a native of the demon world, she was one too. But Ku quickly corrected her, grumbling that he was the true native here, calling her a cheeky kid. They pressed on, heading deeper into the volcanic region. Ku explained that the luminous stones they were searching for would likely be near the lava's eruption point. That meant they had to reach the crater. As they climbed higher, little Nari's eyes widened when she saw the great summit. Overjoyed, she rushed forward and shouted that they had reached the top, raising her arms in triumph. Ku perched on her head while Cheon-do calmly followed behind. From the summit, they spotted the luminous stones glowing near the crater. But before they could get closer, something unexpected appeared. Out from the smoke and heat emerged a large fire toad, its skin glowing with bright patterns. Cheon-do narrowed his eyes, recognizing the creature. He muttered that it was indeed a fire toad. Strangely, the toad's eyes were filled with tears, and as they looked closer, they realized it was crying. Little Nari pointed ahead with urgency, her eyes wide. She shouted for Cheon-do to look, warning him that there was another creature up ahead. Ku, sitting on her head, also looked in the same direction. Down by the crater, they saw the truth. A female fire toad had collapsed and died while moving. Its back was covered with eggs, showing it was carrying young. Ku explained in a serious tone that female fire toads always carried their eggs on their backs after laying them. Only females in the breeding season had a sunken back like that. But since this one had died, all of its eggs were doomed as well. The heat of the crater was far too intense, and none of the eggs would survive. The sight was grim. Little Nari's voice softened with pity. She said the poor fire toad must be sad because its partner had died. Cheon-do, however, remained quiet, his expression unreadable as he watched the scene unfold. Suddenly, Cheon-do told little Nari to stay behind and wait. Pressing his foot firmly on the ground, he launched himself forward with great speed. Startled, little Nari called after him, asking where he was going. She watched as he leapt down the rocky slope, heading straight toward the giant fire toad. Cheon-do landed powerfully in front of the creature, his body steady despite the heat and smoke around him. Ku panicked, shouting for him to come back quickly. He warned that the fire toad was extremely sensitive at that moment, and that getting too close was dangerous. But Cheon-do ignored the warnings, his expression calm and focused. The fire toad glared at him, its throat glowing before it unleashed a burst of scorching flames. The air shook as the fiery breath erupted toward him. Little Nari cried out in fear, calling his name. Yet instead of retreating, Cheon-do charged straight through the fire. His figure, which had a sharp spike coming out, cut through the blazing flames and he emerged unharmed. He stood directly before the massive beast and placed one finger on the fire toad's head as he pierced that sharp spike into it. Instead of attacking again, the fire toad stopped trembling and lowered its head. Cheon-do, speaking softly, told it to stay still just like that. Slowly, the toad calmed down, its heavy breathing easing under his touch. From that sharp spike, Cheon-do carefully used the paralysis toxin of the Neko cobra. He only applied a small amount, enough to calm the fire toad without harming it. Since fire toads were naturally immune to the toxin, he knew the creature would wake up soon. From a distance, little Nari shouted anxiously, asking if he was all right. Cheon-do turned his head back and gave her a reassuring smile, telling her that he was fine. He explained that the reason he could stand so close without being harmed was because fire toad cells existed inside his body. Looking at the fallen creatures, he admitted he couldn't do anything for the ones already dead, but he believed the living ones could still be saved. His eyes shifted to the cluster of glowing eggs. He said the eggs carrying life would survive. A few minutes later, the fire toad opened its eyes. By then, Cheon-do had secured the fire toad eggs tightly with bindings on the male fire toad, saying it should be fine until it regained its strength. The toad let out a low sound, as if speaking, but suddenly, Cheon-do saw something surprising. He saw the male fire toad rubbing his head against the female fire toad. Seeing that, Cheon-do paused, wondering if the creature was saying its final goodbye to its fallen companion. Then the fire toad scraped against the ground, and in an instant, it leapt powerfully into the air. Little Nari could only watch in shock as the bound creature soared upward. She gasped, her voice breaking out in surprise, unable to believe what she was seeing. The toad landed with a heavy crash, shaking the ground beneath. Slowly, its massive eye turned, glowing faintly as it looked straight at her. For a moment, it felt as though the beast was trying to convey something. Little Nari's wide golden eyes reflected her astonishment as she stared back. Then, with another powerful jump, the fire toad launched itself into the distance. Little Nari quickly turned to Cheon-do, her voice filled with wonder. She said that the fire toad had looked their way, and that it almost seemed like it was giving thanks. Cheon-do, in a steady tone, remarked that the toad must have seen its dead mate. Then, turning his focus back to Little Nari, Cheon-do told her to come down so they could mine the luminous stone quickly and return home. Hearing this, Little Nari's face brightened with excitement. She answered eagerly, saying they should dig it up fast and head home together. Little Nari's small hands gripped a glowing stone tightly, pulling it free from the rocky wall. Her face lit up with excitement as she lifted it above her head, proudly showing it off. "It came out!" she shouted happily, her golden eyes sparkling with joy. The stone shone beautifully in her hands, casting light all around. Completely mesmerized, Cheon-do, standing nearby, gave her a calm warning. He told her to be careful, reminding her that if she dropped the stone, it could hurt her foot. Ku also dug out a luminous stone and flew back with his small wings while carrying the stone. He placed the glowing crystal carefully into the bag, its light shining through the fabric. Ku fell on the ground, and Cheon-do, noticing its weariness, asked gently if it was okay, pointing out that it looked tired. Ku muttered with frustration. It recalled how it used to toss such stones around playfully without effort, but now, in its shrunken form, it could barely manage. Cheon-do reassured it, saying it didn't have to help. He suggested Ku could focus on its own errands instead, adding that the gifts Ku carried were probably meant for the friends it was planning to meet. Flustered, Ku puffed up angrily. "What friends does a monster like me even have?" it snapped, insisting it didn't plan to meet anyone. It explained the gifts were just things it intended to leave behind, nothing more. Hearing that, Cheon-do smiled, realizing that Ku was just shy. Cheon-do teased Ku for missing his own kind, saying intelligent monsters were different. Ku quickly denied missing them, insisting it only regretted not being able to say goodbye before leaving. Hearing that, Cheon-do asked it why it really left its group. Ku hesitated. It remembered the times when it first gained intelligence, how there were good things about it. It could think about everything, question itself. But there were also bad things too. It recalled moments with others of its kind, even as they argued over simple things. One of them carelessly ate something without thought, leaving Ku frustrated and realizing that communication didn't always help. Among groups like the one-eyed monkeys, it often felt out of place. Knowing their language only made the emptiness stronger. In the end, it chose to leave the group behind and live alone. Ku thought to itself that maybe its kind didn't even notice when it left. After all, they never had much sense of companionship to begin with. Saying that, it struggled with a stone and groaned in frustration, wondering why it wasn't coming loose. But suddenly, the stone came out, and Ku slipped, its eyes widening in shock as it lost balance. A loud crack echoed through the cave, making Little Nari's eyes widen as she exclaimed that she had heard a noise. When they looked closer, Little Nari pointed excitedly that it was an egg. Cheon-do observed carefully, and confirmed it was indeed a monster egg, though he wasn't sure what kind it belonged to. On closer inspection, they noticed a small crack, possibly caused when Ku had dropped a luminous stone onto it. Looking at the cracked egg, Cheon-do explained that the baby inside should break the shell on its own, as that was how it would grow healthy and strong. Little Nari, however, was unsure what they should do. After a moment of thought, she insisted they take the egg with them, worried that if they left it behind, it would be roasted by the heat of the cave. But Cheon-do hesitated, uncertain, while Ku panicked at the idea of something hatching. Still, Little Nari's determination remained firm, her wide eyes fixed on the egg as the group sat together, facing the decision of what to do next. Cheon-do thought quietly and realized there was actually a safe spot near their house that could serve as a nest. He was also curious about what was inside. Finally, he decided they would take the egg. Hearing that, little Nari happily volunteered to carry it, while Ku protested, saying no sane person would take such a strange egg. But Cheon-do asked Ku, who told it to drop a luminous stone onto it. Hearing that, Ku got flustered but questioned what if little Nari got in danger. Cheon-do reassured it that everything would be fine, promising to protect them. Reluctantly, Ku agreed, trusting him. With the decision made, Cheon-do said they should finish mining more luminous stones. Little Nari cheered in excitement, eager to dig quickly and return home. After some time, the group finally returned home from their journey. Little Nari proudly announced their arrival while holding the mysterious egg tightly in her arms, excitement shining in her eyes. Ku rested on her head, looking wary but following along. As they approached the camp, Nam-gi called out, asking where they had been. Cheon-do was surprised to see that he had returned so quickly. Stepping forward, Nam-gi offered to carry the luggage, but looking at him, Cheon-do felt something was wrong. As Cheon-do gave him the bag, he warned Nam-gi that it was heavy. Trying to act strong, Nam-gi laughed and insisted he could handle it. However, as soon as he grabbed it, the bag fell to the ground. The weight was overwhelming, and Nam-gi struggled under the burden, nearly collapsing. Shocked, he asked what could possibly be inside that made it so heavy. At that moment, Cheon-do saw his face. He asked Nam-gi to raise his head. Nam-gi's face was covered in scratches and bruises. Cheon-do asked him what had happened, wondering if he had been beaten up somewhere. Cheon-do looked at him with surprise, admitting that he never thought Nam-gi was the type to get beaten so easily. Nam-gi scratched his head with an awkward smile, trying to brush it off. He explained that it wasn't what they thought. Little Nari often beat him up during training. Hearing this, Cheon-do was shocked. He couldn't believe Nam-gi said it so proudly. Before the conversation could continue, Nam-gi quickly changed the subject, running off in a panic and saying he would serve food right away. Cheon-do stood silently, arms crossed, watching him with an unreadable expression. Then Cheon-do sat at a small wooden table, carefully cutting and shaping a glowing stone with his finger blade. Seeing that, little Nari, curious as always, came up to him and asked what he was making. Cheon-do calmly explained that he was crafting a lamp out of glowstones. Little Nari's golden eyes widened in excitement when she heard he planned to hang it from the ceiling, imagining how pretty it would look. She watched him work with admiration, telling him she thought he was really smart. To her, he seemed knowledgeable, and always explained things so well. Remembering the toad incident, she also felt that he wasn't just smart, he was kind-hearted too, much like her father. With a bright smile, she said that Cheon-do reminded her of her dad. Hearing that, Cheon-do teasingly asked her if her father was doing well back in the coconut tribe. Nari's expression faltered, and she stiffened for a moment before forcing a smile. She quickly answered that her father was fine, though her unease showed in her trembling voice. As the sun set, the sky turned a warm shade of orange, filling the air with a gentle glow. Ku lay on the ground, feeling the heat. It wasn't as intense as the volcanic zone, but to him, it still felt like his body was melting. He soon dozed off, resting peacefully, until the ground trembled. From the horizon, Mandragora with glowing red eyes appeared, their heavy footsteps echoing against the sunset. They marched forward with intimidating force, surrounding Ku. Furious, they looked at Ku with their red, glowing eyes. Suddenly, the smallest Mandragora leapt, its attacks sharp and fast, but instead of a fight, it spun very fast and used its triple snuggle formation ultimate move. But as it hit, that little Mandragora bounced off Ku's round body in surprise as it flew back. Ku blinked awake, confused by the sudden chaos. Immediately all three of the Mandragora attacked him with their small hands that did no damage to Ku. Ku was surprised. "What's this? What's gotten into you guys?" he muttered, staring at the little Mandragora hopping around and making noise. From a distance, little Nari shouted, demanding to know why everyone was fighting. Cheon-do calmly explained that it looked like the Mandragora were angry because Ku had wandered into their territory. Just then, Nam-gi proudly revealed the dish he had prepared, saying the wait was finally over. He explained that it was sweet, sour, and addictive, something children especially loved. On the plate was yubuchobap, fried tofu pockets stuffed with rice. The food looked delicious and came with its own description. Nam Ki-seok's heartfelt tofu pockets, praised for their taste and balance of nutrition. Nam-gi was proud and smiled as he noted that tofu pockets were simple to make but always looked impressive. At the table, everyone gathered around, their plates filled with the golden brown snacks. Little Nari was amazed, praising Nam-gi for his cooking, but Ku, not satisfied, said it looked decent enough. Nam-gi laughed cheerfully, telling everyone to dig in and enjoy the meal. But before they could continue, Cheon-do paused and asked about Nam-gi's face. He pointed out that the question had been avoided earlier, and wanted to know what had happened. Nam-gi scratched the back of his head nervously, and admitted that he had gone to the Hunter Association to apply for the promotion exam. There, he ran into some A-class hunters who mocked him for failing 7 times. The teasing turned into a fight, which explained his injuries. He explained that they had told him to stop wasting time and muddying the waters. They even mocked his shaved head, asking if his pride had fallen out along with his hair. Unable to hold back, he fought them. Hearing that, Cheon-do curiously asked Nam-gi if he had just shaved. He wasn't completely bald, right? This caused Nam-gi to suddenly defend himself, ranting that the real cause of hair loss was still a medical mystery. He claimed his follicles were still alive and insisted he wasn't fully bald. He said all that with just his eyes. Cheon-do, realizing he had touched a nerve, simply nodded and admitted it was his mistake to bring it up. He then asked Nam-gi when the promotion exam would be held. Nam-gi replied that it was scheduled for the month after next, in 60 days. Hearing this, Cheon-do suggested it was time for special training. Hearing that, Nam-gi grew excited and quickly agreed, saying he would do anything that was asked of him. But instead of intense combat training, Cheon-do told him to take over dish duty from little Nari, who looked exhausted and muttered that the food hadn't been enough. Shocked, Nam-gi shouted in disbelief about having to wash dishes. But Cheon-do pointed at the bag and told him to also clean all the leftover glowstones that were dirty with volcanic ash. Surprised, Nam-gi asked if he really had to wash all of them. When he hesitated, Cheon-do reminded him that if he didn't want to, he could just stay a B-class forever. Cheon-do then turned and told little Nari that she was going with him fishing to aid their digestion. Little Nari happily agreed to go fishing, calling it fun, while Nam-gi stood silently, disappointed and speechless. He just watched Cheon-do, little Nari, and Ku leaving, all the work left to him. Nam-gi then picked up the plates, trying to convince himself that there must be a reason behind these tasks. Deep down, he remembered how everyone always assumed he was a natural-born genius, but in truth, he was not. He clenched his teeth, recalling that he, Nam Ki-seok, had fought his way up to B-class purely through effort and determination. He saw himself as a man who was nothing without his persistence, someone who lived by diligence and perseverance alone. Once he chose to believe in something, he would see it through until the very end. He declared in his heart that he was the kind of man who could fall and still rise again, even if it was the 7th time. With resolve, he ran forward, determined to keep going. He thought to himself that he, Nam Ki-seok, was truly a man who had it all: hard-working, determined, kind, cool, and even charming in his own way. Then at the river, the scene continued with a calm moment by the water. A fishing line dipped into the glowing surface, rippling gently. Nearby, little Nari sighed, noting that no fish were biting. Cheon-do sat beside her, holding his rod. Ku was resting on little Nari's lap. She complained that all the fish seemed to be going to Nam-gi. At the same time, Nam-gi struggled as fish began leaping toward him, pelting him painfully. He shouted in panic, begging for help. He cried out that aquatic creatures were the worst match for his abilities, each hit stinging badly. Seeing that, Cheon-do simply thought to himself how much supervision Nam-gi always needed. Cheon-do then went to Nam-gi and asked him what he thought his mana was for. He reminded Nam-gi to use his mana to form a shield. Embarrassed, Nam-gi admitted that he had practiced during training, but it wasn't going well. Hearing this, Cheon-do reached into the bag of glowstones and pulled one out. He handed it to Nam-gi, instructing him to hold it. Confused, Nam-gi hesitated but obeyed, wondering why Cheon-do had given him a glowstone all of a sudden. But as soon as Nam-gi gripped it, a dark aura surged out of the glowstone, and it fell from Nam-gi's hand onto the ground. Shocked, Nam-gi realized the stone contained demonic energy, which drained his strength and left his arm powerless. Cheon-do explained to him that some glowstones indeed held condensed demonic energy. This revelation startled Nam-gi, but it was clear that this test was part of the training. Cheon-do then gave an explanation about power. He told Nam-gi that the demonic energy from the demon realm was raw and unrefined, something that couldn't be used properly on its own. To control it, one had to use refined mana to push it out first. Cheon-do placed one finger on Nam-gi's chest and told him that he already had plenty of mana inside his body, but he lacked skill in controlling it. Saying that, Cheon-do put his own mana into Nam-gi's body, opening his nerves. The energy within Nam-gi began to flow, lighting up his body from within and opening new channels of power. Nam-gi looked at his glowing hands in shock, Realizing something had awakened, Cheon-do calmly explained that a path had now opened inside him, and he should follow it, channeling his mana through it. Focusing deeply, Namgi clenched his fists as energy surged around him. He was then told to direct that power toward the glowstone and try lifting it again. With determination, Namgi pressed his hands onto the stone, pouring his mana into it. His face tightened with strain, sweat dripping as he gave everything he had. Suddenly, with a burst of power, he managed to raise the glowstone high into the air. He shouted with joy that he had finally done it. Namgi suddenly realized something. Washing the dishes and cleaning the glowstones weren't just chores. It was all part of his master's plan to train his mana. Cheon-do, calm as ever, told him that if that was the case, then he should continue channeling his mana and take care of the dishes from now on. With a wide grin, Namgi declared confidently that his master could count on him. Standing proudly by the waterfall, he proclaimed himself as a man who could polish anything until it shined. Truly, a domestic man at heart. Deep inside, Cheon-do encouraged himself quietly that he could do it. At night, the full moon shone brightly over the small wooden cabin. Inside, as the glowstone glow on the ceiling brightening the room slightly, everyone was fast asleep under the blankets, peaceful and quiet. Namgi mumbled softly in his sleep, as he was quite exhausted after doing all the work in day. Beside him, Cheon-do sleeps quietly beside little Nari. Nearby, the Ku lay awake in its drawer bed, hugging that strange cracked egg glowing with fiery orange lines. It muttered regretfully that it shouldn't have taken a nap earlier. Suddenly, its eyes widened in surprise as it noticed something unusual. It saw the little Nari quietly getting up and leaving the cabin. Confused, it tilted its head while watching her sneak outside, wondering where that child could be going so late at night. Under the bright full moon, little Nari quietly stood in the river, her small hands clutching her clothes. She looked down with a worried expression, noticing how dirty her outfit had become. It was the same one Cheon-do had given her, and she didn't want to ruin it. Murmuring softly, she decided it would be fine once she washed it and began scrubbing it clean. From behind the trees, Cheon-do and Ku watched her. Cheon-do had finally found where she went at night, but he was confused and wondered why she was doing laundry so late. Ku, clearly annoyed, called him dense, reminding him that she was just a girl with no other clothes to change into. Back by the river, little Nari smiled proudly as she lifted her freshly cleaned clothes. She was happy to see the stains gone. Watching her, Cheon-do felt a bit of guilt. It didn't matter what he wore, but she was still just a child. He wondered if he had been too careless with her. After cleaning, little Nari came out of the water. She stood proudly with her washed clothes, smiling brightly. She declared that the laundry was done, and now everything was perfect. Just then, Cheon-do came out from his hiding place, saying that the night air felt nice. Little Nari was surprised to see him and quickly asked what he was doing there. Smiling calmly, Cheon-do explained that he was just out for a walk with Ku, and asked if she was walking too. Flustered, little Nari nervously agreed, pretending she was also out for a walk. Cheon-do then asked her to stay still for a moment. He gently tied a small belt around her waist and added a little flower to it. Looking at his work, he smiled and said it looked cute. Little Nari's face lit up with joy as she looked down at the flower and softly said that it was pretty. She noticed it looked similar to his own outfit. Cheon-do told her it was a forsythia flower, her favorite. But before little Nari could say anything more, a sudden rustling sound came from the bushes. Both of them froze. Little Nari clung to Cheon-do's arm, asking in fear what that sound was. Cheon-do stayed silent, his eyes fixed on the dark forest ahead. But as he closed his eyes and calmly listened to the sound, a faint smile formed on his face. He told little Nari not to worry, because it was just a grasshopper. Hearing that, little Nari sighed in relief, admitting that the noise had startled her. On a nearby leaf, a steel locust, a B-class monster that looked like a metal grasshopper, crawled slowly under the moonlight. Cheon-do then suggested they head home, and little Nari nodded in agreement. As they walked back together, Cheon-do asked if she needed anything, perhaps new clothes or shoes, but little Nari smiled and replied that he had already given her some. Holding his hand tightly, she said she really liked the one she was wearing. Cheon-do looked down at her and smiled softly. "If you say so," he said, as the two continued walking under the quiet, starry night. The next day, Cheon-do went near the slums in District 13. He arrived through a glowing blue gate. He thought to himself that little Nari said she was fine, but he still felt uneasy. As he walked barefoot through the streets, people around him whispered in confusion, wondering why he looked that way. Cheon-do thought about how wrong it felt to make little Nari wear just one old outfit that didn't even fit her properly. Ku had also been nagging him to do something about it. He knew it might have been better to bring little Nari along to pick her own clothes, but the human world could still be too much for her because of her past trauma. Besides, she still had a tracking device attached to her body. Cheon-do chuckled to himself, finding it funny that he used a gatestone just to come back to the slums for children's clothes. Looking around, he muttered that there should be a clothing store somewhere nearby. Suddenly a boy grabbed his sleeve and asked if he was looking for a clothing store. Before Cheon-do could reply, the boy grinned and said he could guide him there for a fee of 10,000 won. Looking at Cheon-do, who clearly didn't look local, the boy proudly told him that he knew a cheap and good place. Hearing that, Cheon-do told the boy that he didn't have any small bills at the moment, but would pay once he got change. Hearing that, the boy glanced at him suspiciously, thinking it was strange for a hunter to not even have 10,000 won. He sighed, assuming Cheon-do must be a rookie who went to the demon realm and got completely scammed. He asked if Cheon-do actually had money to buy clothes. Without waiting for a reply, he waved his hand casually and told him to follow. Cheon-do nodded and walked beside him. The boy added that he usually took payment up front, but was making a special exception because Cheon-do looked too pitiful. Hearing that, Cheon-do gave a small smile and thanked him. As they walked, the boy introduced himself as Oh Bong-soo, and Cheon-do replied with his name. Bong-soo grinned and said he'd just call him Hyung. Seeing police patrols nearby, Cheon-do thought to himself that the slums seemed much safer than before. Bong-soo glanced at Cheon-do curiously and asked if he hadn't been awakened for long. Surprised, Cheon-do asked if it was that obvious. Bong-soo stretched his arms and said that he could tell. Cheon-do came out of a gate with no equipment, which meant he probably spent all his money on gear only to have it stolen by thugs. Bong-soo told him not to get too discouraged since that sort of thing happened to everyone in the beginning. Cheon-do chuckled and commented that Bong-soo seemed to know a lot for someone so young. Offended, Bong-soo shouted that he wasn't a kid. He was just short because he hadn't eaten enough growing up. He proudly declared that he was 17. But suddenly, Cheon-do paused and stared to his side. He was looking at some thugs. When Bong-soo saw Cheon-do looking at them, he told him that even though the whole place was part of the slums, it would be better to avoid District 13 if possible. He explained that the district had become infamous for being dangerous. He went on to say that the Space Gang, which used to operate in District 11, had recently expanded their territory into District 13. The police had mostly given up on controlling that area, so people avoided going there entirely. He pointed out that they were currently in District 12. Hearing that name, Cheon-do looked thoughtful. Space Gang? He muttered inwardly, his expression hardening. He then wondered if the orphanage he used to live in back in District 13 was still standing. Elsewhere, in a small clothing shop, a woman sighed tiredly while staring at a sales sign that read, 1+1 for just 20,000 won. She leaned on the counter, complaining to herself that she must be crazy for trying to run a clothing store in the slums. She lamented that young couples didn't even have children anymore because they couldn't afford them, and since children's clothes were her main business, sales had dropped badly. Looking around the quiet store, she wondered aloud if she should just switch to a different kind of business altogether. But suddenly, the small bell above the shop door jingled as Bong-soo and Cheon-do entered. Bong-soo raised his hand and shouted cheerfully, calling out to the shop owner, "Boss Park Ajuma, I'm here." The blonde woman immediately snapped at him, her face filled with annoyance. She yelled that it was Nuna, not Ajuma, and reminded him she wasn't even married yet. While she shouted, Cheon-do looked around quietly, thinking to himself that it was his first time coming to a clothing store to actually buy clothes. Bong-soo pointed at Cheon-do and told the woman that this man, a hunter, needed some clothes. Hearing that, the blonde woman's expression darkened as she called Bong-soo over in a sharp tone. Nervously, he asked why, but before he could react, she grabbed him by the collar, shouting if he planned to keep bringing broke hunters to her store. She scolded him for not realizing how much debt she was already owed from unpaid tabs. Struggling, Bong-soo mumbled that he had no way of knowing whether Cheon-do had money or not. The woman pointed furiously toward Cheon-do, asking if he looked like someone with money. Meanwhile, Cheon-do calmly examined the store racks, wondering if he had accidentally walked into the children's section. Still being held, Bong-soo tried to defend himself, muffled, but insisting that Cheon-do was at least handsome. The woman glared at him but couldn't argue back. Then, Bong-soo shouted that she was the one who told him to help pitiful hunters, because they reminded her of her late younger brother. Embarrassed, she argued that she had only said that once or twice, and that if she kept helping kids like him, she'd end up homeless. Their bickering grew louder, with Bong-soo shouting that she was the one who first helped him by buying him a meal. She replied that it didn't matter, and told him to clean up while she gave him some money. But before they could continue arguing, Cheon-do stepped forward and spoke politely. "Excuse me," he said. He took out a check and told them he wanted to buy some clothes, asking how much he could get with all the money he had. Hearing that, both the shop owner and Bong-su froze in shock as they stared at the check in Cheon-do's hand. Their eyes widened in disbelief. The woman stuttered, barely able to form words, realizing that he was holding a check worth 10 million won. Bong-su also gasped loudly, repeating the amount in shock. They both thought to themselves how unbelievable it was. Cheon-do had said, "This is all I have," while casually handing over such a huge amount. After a brief pause, the woman quickly clapped her hands together with a forced smile, her tone suddenly cheerful and polite. With a bright sparkle in her eyes, she introduced her store with enthusiasm, welcoming him warmly to Happy Kung World, the place where one could meet a new you every day. The scene changed as Bong-su hurriedly pulled out a chair for Cheon-do, and the woman began speaking in an overly friendly tone, offering him food and drinks. Cheon-do sat down quietly, a bit confused by the sudden hospitality. The woman eagerly explained that her store had everything, from adult clothes to children's clothes, and asked whether he was shopping for himself. Cheon-do calmly replied that he wanted clothes for a preschool-aged girl and something for himself as well. Her expression softened instantly, and she called it sweet, saying he had come to the perfect place since children's wear was her specialty. She excitedly suggested starting with the latest spring and summer collection. As she began showing options, she waved around bright frilly dresses, declaring that lace was an absolute must-have. Then she held up coordinated outfits, saying they were great for active kids since they were easy to move in. Finally, she held up a pink outfit, and said with full confidence that if he ever saw pink, he simply had to buy it. Cheon-do sat quietly at the table, while Bong-su stood behind him, both looking a bit overwhelmed as she continued showing outfit after outfit with unshakable enthusiasm. The receipt machine printed several long slips filled with text. The blonde shop owner looked down at the piles of clothes on her counter, exhaustion and disbelief on her face. Every item had been sold out. She sighed, thinking she could have sold even more if there hadn't been a stock shortage. She looked up at Cheon-do standing before her, and told him that he had bought over 100 items, asking if he wanted them delivered. Cheon-do calmly replied that he would carry them himself. Before leaving, he handed a small package and some money to Bong-su, saying it was for him. Bong-su froze in surprise, unable to respond right away. Cheon-do told Bong-su he had one more favor to ask. As they walked down the street, Cheon-do carried his bag of clothes with a light smile, remarking that buying new clothes felt pretty good. Bong-su followed beside him quietly. Eventually, they arrived at a small inn. Bong-su explained that it was a clean and decent place, close to a police station, and run by a kind owner. Cheon-do nodded and said he would check it out. He told Bong-su to wait outside for a moment before heading in with his bag. Bong-su, a bit nervous, nodded and said softly that he would wait. Bong-su stood outside the inn, frowning slightly. Something didn't feel right to him. He thought that no matter how rich that man was, it didn't make sense for him to give a street kid like him 100,000 won, and even buy him clothes. He tightened his grip on the bag in his hands, unease growing inside him. He'd heard stories about people who lured homeless kids with money just to kidnap them later. The thought made him wonder if he should run away before it was too late. But then, another thought crossed his mind. What if Cheon-do was actually a good person, someone kind like Boss Park? The image of her bright smile came to his mind, softening his doubt. Just then, the door to the inn opened, and Cheon-do stepped out. He said the place was just as Bong-su described, clean and run by a kind owner. Then, he held out a key with the number 303 on it, and told Bong-su to take it. He explained that it looked like Bong-su had been living on the streets, so he'd already paid a year's rent in advance. Bong-su would live here from now on, and meals were also covered, so he should eat properly. Bong-su's eyes widened in shock. He looked down at the key in disbelief, struggling to process what he'd just heard. Cheon-do then turned to leave, saying he would be on his way. Bong-su hesitated before asking quietly if he would be kidnapped if he went inside the hotel. As he said that, suddenly, a bright blue portal swirled in front of him. Cheon-do turned and asked Bong-su what he was talking about, reminding him that he was the one who had introduced them. Hearing that, Bong-su questioned Cheon-do, asking what his real goal was if not that. Bong-su looked at him with an expression filled with doubt and emotion. He said softly that they had only met for the first time that day. The finder's fee, the new clothes, and even the room. He couldn't understand why Cheon-do had been so kind to him. Hearing that, Cheon-do smiled faintly, and told Bong-su that he simply reminded him of how things used to be long ago. Cheon-do confessed that he once lived the same way Bong-su did, though that was a very long time ago. As the portal shimmered brighter, Cheon-do's voice echoed gently, saying goodbye, and that they would see each other again someday. With that, Cheon-do returned to the demon world. Standing under the clear blue sky with a large bag in his hand, he announced that he was back. Little Nari ran up to him, her face full of surprise, asking where he had gone without saying anything. Cheon-do replied calmly that he had gone to buy them a present, and showed her the bag full of clothes. Little Nari's eyes sparkled with excitement as she peeked inside the bag. Seeing the pile of new clothes, she gasped and shouted in amazement. Ku looked into the bag too, and was clearly surprised by the amount. Little Nari quickly pulled out a bright yellow outfit, grinning widely and saying the clothes were really pretty. Nam-gi, beside them, nervously asked if there was anything for him, to which Cheon-do flatly replied that there wasn't. Little Nari didn't mind. She happily clutched her new clothes as Cheon-do told her that if she found something she liked, she could go inside and try it on. Excited, she ran off toward the cabin, saying she would do it right away. Inside the cabin, sunlight streamed through the doorway, shining on the strange egg resting in the wooden box. Cracks began to spread across its surface, glowing faintly with orange light. Outside, Cheon-do sat at a wooden table, folding clothes neatly into stacks. As he worked quietly, he thought to himself that once he started folding, it somehow relaxed him. Suddenly, Little Nari called out for him, asking him to look at what she was wearing. She twirled happily in her new yellow dress and hat, saying she thought the outfit was cute. Cheon-do smiled and agreed, asking if that one was her favorite. Little Nari thought for a moment, then said she wanted to try on a few more. A while later, she came out struggling with a pair of jeans that were too big, asking how anyone was supposed to wear them. Soon after, she appeared again, draped in an oversized shirt, laughing and pretending to be a ghost. Cheon-do looked at her with an amused smile, realizing it was his shirt she was wearing. She kept showing different outfits, full of energy and excitement, saying there were so many cool ones to choose from. Watching her, Cheon-do couldn't help but chuckle softly, commenting that she was so hyped up, but also really cute. Finally, Little Nari came running again, proudly saying she had chosen her outfit. She wore a hoodie with a small yellow chick printed on the front and shorts that matched her shoes. With a big grin, she said she loved it because the chick looked just like Ku. Hearing that, Ku, beside Cheon-do, stared in disbelief, asking if that was supposed to be him. Cheon-do smiled and told her that she had made a good choice, asking if she wanted to put the rest of the clothes away by herself. Little Nari eagerly nodded and ran off, saying she would take care of it. After she left, Ku floated nearby, looking at the pile of clothes with concern. It asked what Cheon-do planned to do with all of them, since there wasn't enough space in the house. Cheon-do thought for a moment, and said he had an idea. He planned to expand the house and add a dressing room with a walk-in closet. As he imagined the layout, Ku questioned whether that meant cutting down more trees. Cheon-do calmly told it not to worry, explaining that he already had someone else to handle chopping wood. Turning his head toward the field, he called out, asking if Nam-gi was ready for some special training. A loud crash shook the ground as Nam-gi suddenly appeared, landing with energy and confidence. Kneeling on one knee, he declared that he was always ready for special training. He then stood up straight and proudly said that he had even brought Cheon-do's training gear with him. Cheon-do got confused and asked what he meant by training gear. Nam-gi proudly held up the old leather armor made of Ku's skin, asking, "Isn't this Cheon-do's training uniform?" He mentioned that the armor was covered in some kind of strong poison, admitting he had accidentally touched it and nearly died. Excited, Nam-gi looked at Cheon-do and said that it must be part of his extreme training, pushing his limits even during daily life. With admiration, he declared that he respected Cheon-do greatly and promised to work even harder by following his example. Hearing him, Cheon-do thought to himself that he had just never bothered to wash it properly, and Nam-gi misunderstood it. Cheon-do then told Nam-gi that since he respected it so much, he should wear it himself. Hearing that, Nam-gi froze in fear, unsure if he had heard correctly. Cheon-do seriously told him that he was already done with his own training. He told Nam-gi to put on the armor and start chopping wood, while he and Ku would choose which trees to cut. Panicking, Nam-gi shouted that he would die if he wore the poisoned armor and questioned why they suddenly needed wood. But before he could continue, Little Nari burst out of the house, calling for Cheon-do in alarm. When he turned to her, she shouted that the egg was acting weird. Hearing that, everyone rushed inside and saw cracks forming across the dark shell of the egg. Glowing lines spread across its surface as the egg began to shake. Cheon-do observed the movements and said that judging from how it was moving, the egg was about to hatch. Hearing that, Little Nari gasped in surprise, while Nam-gi watched with wide eyes, realizing that something incredible was about to happen. Nam-gi nervously asked Cheon-do what if the creature inside the egg might be a disaster-class monster. Hearing that, Cheon-do began to think, but little Nari laughed excitedly and claimed that she was sure it would be something cute. Namgi frowned and muttered that they could never be too sure, but little Nari immediately shouted in protest, refusing to believe it could be dangerous. Just then, a crack spread across the egg, and a glowing yellow eye suddenly appeared from within. The group froze as the shell began to break apart. Namgi panicked, yelling that it was hatching. Little Nari's eyes sparkled with excitement as she repeated the words, her voice filled with wonder. The egg shattered completely, and a claw covered in golden scales burst out. Sharp talons tore through the air, followed by a powerful tail that smashed through the remaining shell. As the creature emerged, Namgi described what he saw in horror. Sharp claws, thick scales, and a tongue that lashed out in fury. He shouted that the monster looked terrifying and tried to say what it was, but then, the newly hatched creature lifted its head and let out a cheerful chirp. Everyone froze in shock as they saw the small, bright-eyed baby staring at them. Despite its fearsome entrance, it looked surprisingly cute. Namgi stared at the tiny creature in disbelief, asking if it was a chick or a snake, completely unsure what he was looking at. Little Nari's eyes sparkled with excitement as she leaned closer, shouting that it was adorable. The small creature tilted its head and chirped, making her squeal with joy. But before anyone could react, it suddenly jumped off the table, moving with surprising speed and agility. Everyone's eyes widened in shock as the strange creature leaped high into the air. In an instant, it landed right on Namgi's face, wrapping its tiny body around his head. He stood frozen, eyes wide, as the creature's tail flicked and its tongue playfully stuck out. There was a brief moment of silence. Then Namgi's terrified scream echoed through the entire house. Sometime later, as Cheon-do constructed, Namgi carried a heavy log on his shoulder, while wearing his leather armor. Ku sat on his head, urging him to hurry, saying they had a mountain of work to do. Namgi frowned, feeling slightly annoyed, wondering why the little monster sounded like it was scolding him. Not just that, there was poison on his clothes, making him struggle even more. He clenched his teeth, gasping for air and struggling to breathe under the poison's effect. He shouted in frustration, questioning how Cheon-do could have ever worn such a poisonous outfit before. Meanwhile, under the clear blue sky, Cheon-do stretched his arms after folding a pile of clothes, satisfied and relaxed. He smiled and said that it felt good to fold clothes again. Just then, little Nari called out to him, pointing excitedly. She shouted that the little creature was eating the bread. Holding the small snake-like being in her hands, she smiled brightly and said that it was obedient and gentle. Cheon-do nodded, explaining that it probably recognized her as the one who had saved it. Little Nari then asked what they should name it. After a short pause, Cheon-do suggested calling it Sasa, since it was a snake. But before anyone could respond, the golden snake suddenly dashed away, glowing with energy. Startled, little Nari shouted in panic, asking where it was going. She ran after it, yelling for it to come back. Watching them from afar, Ku smiled and commented that those two seemed to be getting along well. Cheon-do agreed, and added that little Nari really seemed to like their new family member. Cheon-do then looked at the small golden creature with curiosity, and asked Ku if it was a rare species. He mentioned that he had never seen one like it before. Ku agreed, saying it hadn't seen one either. Then, speaking in a serious tone, Ku said that if the golden snake had come from the volcanic region, they would need to watch the mandragora carefully. Hearing that, Cheon-do got confused and asked why. Ku explained that monsters from volcanic regions often loved eating plant monsters. Since plants were scarce there, they would eat any kind they found. It added that those monsters especially liked plants filled with demonic energy, meaning the snake would likely try to dig up and eat the mandragora. Just as Ku said that, the golden creature charged at the mandragora. As it looked at the mandragora with its red glowing eyes, Ku warned them that this snake might be the mandragora's natural enemy. The ground shook as the snake and the mandragora faced each other. Cheon-do's group stood back in shock, watching the sudden tension rise. Namgi shouted in confusion, asking what was going on. Cheon-do stayed calm, and replied that it looked like Ku's prediction had been right all along. Little Nari clenched her fists, and shouted that she would stop them from fighting. But Cheon-do crossed his arms and replied calmly, saying it would be nice if they didn't fight. But this was the demon realm, and battles were normal here. He explained that sometimes creatures needed to establish their pecking order, and since they were still young, it wouldn't be too dangerous. He suggested they just watch. As the dust swirled, the mandragoras and the golden snake faced off. The snake's eyes glowed fiercely as it targeted the smallest mandragora. It lunged forward, its sharp claws ready to strike. But before it could hit, the largest mandragora stepped in front and blocked the attack with a wooden stick. Cheon-do, watching, exclaimed in surprise, realizing that the mandragoras had formed a triangle formation, defending first, then preparing to counterattack. The battle between the golden snake and the mandragoras grew intense. After the first mandragora blocked the attack, the second one quickly counterattacked, moving with surprising speed and force. The snake twisted its body, blocking the strike with its tail. Little Nari, watching, gasped, realizing that the snake seemed to be smiling confidently. But Ku beside her warned not to let their guard down yet. Then, the smallest mandragora suddenly leapt forward from behind, attacking with determination. The ground shook as it struck, and a flash of light filled the air. When the dust cleared, the snake was left stunned. The mandragoras stood in formation, their teamwork perfect. Tears welled up in the snake's eyes as it began to cry softly. The group watching was surprised. Namgi asked in disbelief if it was actually crying, while little Nari guessed that it must be shocked since it was its first time being hit. As the snake cried out loudly and ran off, little Nari followed it to calm it down. Watching the scene, Cheon-do crossed his arms and declared that the mandragoras had won this round. Seeing that, Namgi stood speechless, his eyes wide in amazement. He admitted that the battle he had just witnessed was truly epic. Ku nodded in agreement, saying that it had been a pretty good fight. Cheon-do then asked them to head back. Hearing that, Ku called out to Namgi, telling him to get up quickly. Startled, Namgi muttered in disbelief, wondering if they were even human. Meanwhile, the scene shifted to the ocean, where the calm waves sparkled under the clear blue sky. Suddenly, a powerful gust cut through the air as a giant winged creature burst out and soared into the sky. It had the body of a warrior but the head and wings of a bird, its feathers glistening with drops of water and blue light. The creature rose higher, spreading its wings wide under the blazing sun. The next day, the sky was clear and bright. Their wooden house made of logs was being built. Namgi was carrying a large log while sweating heavily. The guy sitting on his head shouted for him to go faster and work more. Nearby, little Nari happily spread green paste on the logs. She said that applying a lot of it was fun. The small yellow snake beside her helped. Inside the house, Chinidole placed the new clothes he bought into the new cabinet they had made. Then sometime later, Namgi threw Chinidole's rolled-up fur outfit on the ground. He collapsed to his knees and shouted loudly that it finally ended. His eyes welled up as he thought about how he had not slept for 2 whole days. It felt like a terrible time. He wished for proper rest breaks. Even so, he looked at the wooden house he finished and said he made it exactly as he was told. But seeing the evil aura the house was releasing, he looked at it quietly and wondered if he did it right. Chen-du, who was standing behind him in a light shirt, looked at the house and smiled. He told Namgi that he built it better than he expected. Hearing that, Namgi was surprised. He wondered if it was really better than expected. Suddenly, little Nari appeared and stood near Namgi. She sniffed the air and said that the dressing room smelled like flowers. Hearing her, Namgi got confused and asked if it really smelled like flowers. But when he stopped for a moment, sat on the grass, closed his eyes, and relaxed, he also smelled flowers. He thought that the scent was calming, like lavender. Little Nari then asked why the place smelled like flowers. Cheon-du explained that Gyudu had chosen a special type of wood that had a nice scent. Gyudu added that with this, their clothes would also smell nice. The small mandragon plants swayed happily. They seemed to enjoy the scent too. The small snake was lying on the floor. It also looked relaxed and happy. Seeing that, Cheon-du smiled and told the others it looked like Sasa liked it too. Hearing the name Sasa, Namgi got confused and asked if they had decided to name the little one Sasa. Little Nari told him Cheon-du had come up with it. Cheon-du said they could change the name if there was a better one. Hearing that, Namgi proudly suggested the name Snake Chick. Cheon-du stared at him silently, thinking that Namgi had no right to talk about naming sense. Then little Nari suggested the name Pikiaki. Hearing that, Cheon-du pointed out that it sounded too similar to Gu's name. Then Gu spoke seriously and suggested the name, The Magnificent Footprints in the Drawer. Hearing that, Cheon-du got confused. He then asked Guo if it said it also had a name and what it was. Immediately Guo said its real name was Rocky Mountain Hoof, saying the name expressed its identity. Hearing the name, Cheon-du realized that Guo was also hopeless. Finally, he suggested to just go with Sasa. They all agreed to name the snake Sasa, as Cheon-du and little Nari both said they liked the name. Akyu then asked Cheon-du what the next plan was. Now that the house extension was complete, Cheon-du was surprised by Gu's sudden question. He thought for a second and told them he had thought about something while visiting the human world. Looking at little Nari, Namgi, Gu, and Sasa, Cheon-du thought that before he had been alone, so he never needed to think about such things before. Then he closed his eyes and smiled softly, realizing that things were different now. He suggested building a strong fence around the house. He said that even if he left for a while, this would stop others from walking in easily. Namgi looked at the house releasing evil aura, and said he didn't think anyone would come here anyway. The house already looked dangerous and scary, but Shenbu explained they could not be sure. Looking at little Nari, he said a strong monster could appear, or hunters could come searching for something. Gusain then said that if they were going to build a fence, it should be made from a material filled with strong demonic energy and also be durable. He suggested going to the coastal area. He said he had heard that there were yellow crystals near the coast. It was harder than black stone. Kron imagined building the fence with that crystal and placing glowstones at the bottom. Hearing that, Chengdu thought it would look nice at night, like a campsite. He then decided they should go to the coastal area right away. Hearing this, little Nari became very excited and said they were going to the beach. But Namgi was shocked and stuttered upon hearing they were going to the coastal area. He shouted inside his head, asking if they even knew what kind of place the coastal area was. He began to panic and said that place was dangerous. But suddenly, blood dripped from his nose as he trembled. Seeing that, Namgi thought the timing was good. He quickly pretended to be ill and knelt down. He told Chengdu that he needed to go release his demonic energy. Chengdu agreed and told him to take care of the mandragoras if they returned late. But before they left, Namgie told Chengdu that even for him, the coastal area was dangerous and he must be careful. Chengdu asked him why. Namgie explained that the coastal area was almost off limits to anyone A-class or below. He said that 2 disaster-grade monsters ruled that whole region. Chilon was surprised to hear that. Namgie explained that those 2 monsters were chimera hunters, who had escaped a lab long ago. They had heads like birds, but their bodies were still human. Meanwhile, one of the creatures Namgie was talking about was flying above the coastal area. It was large, with a bird's head and wings, and it flew through the sky. On the ground, a group of hunters saw it. One of them pointed and said it had finally appeared. He ordered the others to prepare the tracker. Another person formed a glowing ring in his hands and said he was on it. He threw the glowing ring into the sky. The ring flew fast and hit the bird-like creature in the air. The group said it was a direct hit, but the creature did not fall. Instead, it quickly flew away. One of the hunters commented in surprise, asking why it was running away so fast. Another person said that people had called it a disaster-grade monster, but maybe that was just a rumor. A young guy asked if they should chase it now, but a man with a black beard said no, because there were 2 of those creatures. He said they should wait until the creatures returned to their shelter. He explained that the tracker had already hit, so there was no need to hurry. With curiosity, the younger guy asked that after 60 years, the creatures should have died by now or fully turned into monsters. He wondered why their bodies were still human. The black-bearded man said they should be seen as a kind of failure. The man with the black beard looked confident as he spoke. He said that no matter what others thought, creating chimera hunters was humanity's greatest success. He said they should not allow a failure to stain that achievement. He declared that today they would erase that failure. But suddenly, a soldier nearby was using binoculars. He called out nervously to the team leader. The team leader asked what was wrong. The soldier looked through the binoculars again. He saw the winged monster in the sky. He realized that the monster was not running away. Instead, it was flying straight toward them. The soldier shouted in panic that the monster was coming their way. The team leader quickly yelled for everyone to raise a defensive barrier. A green barrier formed on the ground, but the winged monster came down at high speed and crashed into it with great force. The barrier shattered. The impact pushed the hunter team back. The leader and the soldier were hit by the shock, and both cried out in pain. The bird-headed monster flew up high into the sky. From above, it looked down at the people on the ground. Someone shouted in shock that the barrier had been broken in just one hit. The bird-headed monster flipped in the air and came diving down again. The people on the ground became nervous. One person wondered if their judgment about the monster had been wrong. The monster rushed toward them with strong power. The leader yelled at everyone to stop the monster immediately. Just then, little Nari jumped in and kicked the monster with force, shouting loudly for the monster to stop picking on weak people. The monster stared at her and immediately realized that she was also a chimera. The monster swung its arm, but little Nari blocked it. She returned to Chain's side and watched the monster carefully. Little Nari said that the sparrow-looking man was bullying others, but Chen Ag looked at the monster and quietly told her that it seemed to be the other way around. Behind them, the soldier called out to his team leader urgently. He said to the team leader that he sensed a mechanical creature nearby. The surprised team leader asked what he was talking about all of a sudden. The soldier hesitated and said the commission fee was good, so he accepted a tracking device. Hearing them, Chayan placed his hand on little Nari. He remembered that little Nari had a tracking device on her. He thought this situation was getting annoying. He looked ahead at the birdman and thought that he didn't expect to see this person again. As the creature with the head of a bird landed on the ground, Cheon spoke casually and asked if it remembered him. He told the bird-headed creature that they used to be roommates and asked what number it was again. Hearing that, the bird-headed creature was shocked. Chain continued speaking, saying he didn't expect the creature to still be alive. He said it was strange how things turned out. Hearing that, the bird-headed creature started trembling, slowly remembering Chenwu High School. But suddenly, Chen heard the soldier telling his team leader that this new man seemed suspicious. Hearing this, the team leader suggested that they should leave for now. He asked his group to prepare to retreat and regroup later. Hearing them, Cheon told the bird-headed creature that if these hunters went back now, it would cause trouble for both sides. He suggested that they should clean this up. Hearing Cheon speak, the bird-headed man recognized him and said that it was really him. The bird-headed man remembered Cheon's scent from the past. He thought that he could forget many things, but he could never forget that smell. He remembered the time when he and Cheon were in a lab together. They were lying on cold metal tables with wires attached to their bodies. Only they knew that experience. That smell came from the chimera cell combination drug used in the TDA research lab. The bird-headed man looked at Chen, who had a small owl on his head and a small snake around his neck, and with a smile said, "It has been a long time." Number 17. The scene shifts back to 66 years ago, near the TDA laboratory. Bright searchlights cut through the dark forest as people shouted directions, telling each other to chase the escapees. A small boy with a bird's head ran through the trees while carrying a girl on his back. The girl shivered and told him she felt very cold. Sweat dripped down her face. The bird-headed boy realized she was having a seizure from the drug's side effects, and he worried that it was happening at the worst possible moment. Branches scratched his body as he ran, and he wondered if he was making the right choice. He thought that even if he died to the lab agents chasing them, he had to keep moving. But doubt crept into his mind. He wondered if it would have been easier to leave Jai behind. He looked at the girl on his back and thought that if she had fully turned into a bird, she might have been able to fly away. But with only her small, weak wings, she could not do anything to help. Still, he kept running through the dark forest, even as blood dripped from his injuries. As the bird-headed boy ran through the dark forest, holding his little sister on his back, she shivered and weakly said that her brother's wings felt warm. She told him she was fine and begged him to keep running. He rushed through the trees, panting, telling her that once they escaped the forest, everything would be okay. He thought desperately that if they escaped this place they might meet someone who could help them. But suddenly, a bright light shone in front of them. A young boy stood there, holding a glowing light in his hand. The bird-headed boy froze in shock and called out to the boy he knew. Number 17. He asked why he was here. Number 17 said he had heard news at the lab earlier that day. The scientist said the bird-headed boy's side effects were getting worse, and that he would be disposed of soon, so he came to warn him. Hearing that, the bird-headed boy called Number 17 a psycho who was always strangely helpful at the worst possible moments. Number 17 then warned the bird-headed boy that even if he escaped, a detonation spell would kill him if he didn't return to the lab within 3 days. He added that the bird-headed boy's sister did not seem to be scheduled for disposal yet. Number 17 asked why they didn't just stay at the lab and take the suppressants. That would help them survive at least one extra day. But the bird-headed boy became angry. He said Number 17 would never understand because Number 17 had no side effects. He said Number 17 didn't know how painful it was to live like them. The bird-headed boy remembered how he held his head as his body trembled. He knelt on the cold floor and shouted that his head was hurting. His little sister hugged him from behind, her eyes full of worry as she softly asked him to run away with her. She cried and told him she wanted to live like they used to, even if it was only for one day. Tears streamed down her face as she held him tightly. The bird-headed boy placed his sister near a tree, as a question echoed in his mind, whether it mattered how long someone lived, or whether it mattered how they lived. Dark wings burst open from the bird-headed boy's back as green light flashed around him. He shouted that he wanted to live freely, even if it was just for one day. He spread his wings wide, his eyes glowing with determination. He faced forward and told Number 17 to stop talking and come at him. But Number 17 stood still and looked at him with a calm expression. Then suddenly, bright blue power gathered behind him. A huge swirling blue gate opened, lighting up the forest. The bird-headed boy stared at the glowing portal in shock and asked Number 17 how he got a gate stone. Number 17 told them that if they crossed into the demon realm, only two things could happen. Either their human cells would be poisoned by demonic energy, or their monster cells would absorb it and awaken. Pointing at the portal behind him, Number 17 told the bird-headed boy that if he meant what he said earlier, then this option was better, because even if they eventually turned into monsters, they could live freely until then. He also added that if they crossed over to the demon realm, the lab's detonation spell wouldn't activate. Hearing this, with a serious face, the bird-headed boy asked if it was possible to survive as a human in the demon realm. Number 17 told him that theoretically, They would have to build up enough mana to protect their body and mind from the demonic energy. He said it would be difficult with their current abilities, but the future might hold different possibilities. While he was saying that, suddenly voices from behind shouted that the gate had opened and ordered everyone to capture them. The bird-headed boy thanked number 17, unsure why he was helping them. He said he was leaving, but before stepping through, he told number 17 that they had been roommates for 4 years, yet they didn't even know each other's names. The bird-headed boy looked back and told number 17 his name was Yubiome, and asked for his name. Number 17 laughed and said his name was Chain Dawoon. With this, the flashback ended, and the bird-headed man returned to the present. He looked at Chen Du, who extended his hand, and golden dust shimmered around. Golden dust rushed across the sky, swirling around the field. The soldiers standing on the hill stared at him in shock as the dust spread around their feet. Chen Wu stood in front of them and calmly asked them what his name was. One of the men, whose eyes had turned yellow because of the golden dust Chen released, said he did not know. Then Chen asked him why he had come there. The soldier said he had no idea. Hearing that, Chen opened a glowing portal and said everything had worked perfectly. He pointed toward the portal and ordered the soldiers to step into it. He told them to forget everything that had happened there. When the bird-headed man smelled the scent of the golden dust, he was shocked and questioned if Chen had erased those soldiers' memories using oblivion powder and hypnosis. Chen said that was right, and explained that he had the cells of an oblivion herb transplanted into his body, and about 3 hours of those hunters' memories before and after would be erased completely. Hearing that, the bird-headed man asked Chan if the researchers had transplanted many things into him because he had no side effects. Chan told the bird-headed man that a lot had happened after he left. Chen Wu looked at the bird-headed man and recognized him as number 33, and asked if his name had been Yubeom. Hearing that, the bird-headed man nodded slightly, and was surprised. He admitted he never expected Chen to remember his name. Suddenly, little Nari held Cheon's shirt and tugged it gently. When Cheon looked back, she asked him if he and that sparrow uncle were really friends. Cheon said yes, and told her that this birdman was from the sparrow tribe. Yubeom looked at them in confusion when he heard them calling him a sparrow. Cheon then asked little Nari if the sparrow tribe and her coconut tribe were allies. Hearing that, little Nari panicked and immediately agreed, saying they were allies. Yubeom watched them and thought he couldn't understand anything they were saying. Little Nari then bent down quickly and apologized to him. She told the sparrow uncle she was sorry, and that she had mistaken him for a bad person. While she was saying that, her stomach growled loudly. Little Nari looked up and told Chinfro that she was hungry. Hearing that, Chinfro turned to Yubeom and asked where his house was and if he had any food. Yubeom stared at them in confusion. He wondered if the girl was Choen's daughter, or if the man was raising a child, or if this was some kind of roleplay. Then Yubeom led them to a quiet beach. In the distance there was a large house shaped exactly like a giant bird's nest, built from woven branches. Little Nari looked at the nest-shaped house with shining eyes and asked if that was Sparrow Uncle's home. She commented that it looked like a real bird's nest. Then all three of them sat on a large mat spread across the sand. Little Nari and Gui sat on one side, while Chan sat calmly in the center, and told Yubeom that he had built the house very well. Yubeom came toward them and held out a bowl, asking them to try some food, though he wasn't sure how it would taste. Steam rose from the bowl as he lifted the lid. Inside were large grilled clams. Melted golden butter was dripping over them, made from a demon realm plant called butternut, which tasted like real butter. On top was bright red moss, another demon realm plant that tasted like samjang. Seeing that, little Nari's eyes widened as she shouted that the clams were huge. Staln looked at the food and said it seemed pretty decent. Glouder then picked up a clam, stared at it seriously, and said it would give it a try. When it took a bite, its eyes widened. It trembled as if overwhelmed and wondered whether it had swallowed the entire ocean or if the ocean had swallowed it instead. Little Nari took a bite too. Her eyes sparkled, and she shouted that the clam felt like it was dancing with every chewy bite. Then Chan tried a clam topped with red moss. He looked surprised as he tasted it. Yubeom, with a proud look, explained that the red moss was an all-purpose seasoning, perfect for almost anything. He said he was glad they liked it and told them to eat slowly. But before he could complete his words, suddenly his eyes widened in shock as he froze. He was trembling in pain, and Chan noticed it but looked at him quietly. Little Nari, who had eaten everything from her plate, rushed toward Yubeom with excitement. She held up her plate and shouted that she wanted more of the food. Trying to hide his pain, Yubeom laughed awkwardly and said he had run out of ingredients for the day, asking what he should do. Hearing that, little Nari's eyes sparkled as she asked if he could make it again, if she caught more clams. Yubeom said he could, but warned it might be dangerous for a kid to catch them. Little Nari ignored his warning and yelled that she would catch 10 of them. She dashed toward the beach with full energy. Gru bouncing on her head and Sasa racing beside her. While running away, little Nari said she needed 10 clams to feel full. As waves washed onto the sand, Ubeum spoke again. He said it was amazing that Chan had come back to life thanks to his immortality cells. He added that Chan's life was truly something else. As they sat on the beach, Ubeum turned and asked Chan if he was planning to take revenge on the TDA laboratory. Chan answered slowly. He said that sometimes, when he thought about it, he felt like wanting revenge. But then he looked out toward the sea at little Nari, and said his current life wasn't so bad, so he planned to take his time before deciding anything. Chaeyeon then asked Ubeum if he himself wanted revenge. Ubeum pointed out that all the spells on Chaeyeon had disappeared when he came back to life, but the rest of them still had the detonation spell inside their bodies. If they ever returned to the human world, they would explode immediately. Chaeyeon listened quietly, and said it seemed like Ubeum could now control his wings, then asked if his head would return to normal. Ubeum closed his eyes and smiled faintly. He said he could change it back, but he didn't want to. He explained that his little sister Jaya's face had changed. If he was the only one who looked normal, she might feel bad. Hearing that, Chaeyeon looked at him seriously and asked one more question. He said Ubeum already knew himself that he had only 1 month left to live at most. Ubeum, who sat with his arms crossed, looked away, letting out a quiet breath. He asked if Chaeyeon had also noticed. He then looked out at the sea, and said that the situation brought back old memories. He explained that things had been very hard when he first arrived in that place. He remembered how he had desperately gathered mana just to survive. Then at some point, his mana and demonic energy had started to balance each other. Because of that balance, he had lived peacefully for a long time. Then he remembered something that happened not long ago. Dark red energy surrounded the scene, as he recalled how something went wrong with Jia. He explained that Jia's mana hole became tangled, and her demonic energy began to rage out of control. Ubeum said he had tried to force it open, but ended up hurting his own mana hole by accident. He held his chest while trembling and explained that he was barely enduring the damage, but Jia had started eating fruits mixed with sleeping poison and had been sleeping for a while. Chaeyeon, sitting beside him, listened quietly and realized that Chaeyeon had purposely put herself into a deep sleep to slow down the wild demonic energy inside her. After hearing all that, a single word crossed Chaeyeon's mind: Mandragora. He knew that when someone's mana hole is damaged, they can make a potion with Mandragora, and it heals right away. He sighed in disbelief that Ubeum didn't know such a simple thing. Meanwhile, inside Ubeum's house, a pink fruit rolled across the ground. More of the same pink fruits were scattered everywhere under the dim shadows of the vines. Deep inside the cave, a small creature with glowing eyes sat trembling on a nest-like platform. It was Ubeum's little sister, Ja. Suddenly a loud scream echoed through the darkness as Jai's body jerked, clutching herself in pain. Her mask shook, and her voice came out in a sharp, agonizing cry. Ubeum suddenly raised his voice in shock. His eyes widened and his feathers trembled as he asked Jonam if both he and Jia could really survive. He clutched his chest with shaking hands, struggling to understand, and stuttered out another question, demanding to know how such a thing was possible. Jonam calmly explained his reasoning. He said that since he had learned pharmaceutics at the research institute from the age of 15, Ubeum might not have known since he ran away at 10 years old. Hearing that, Ubeum echoed the unfamiliar word with confusion. Jen continued walking across the sandy ground and said that all they needed was Manahal purified water mixed with Mandragora fine roots. He explained that the plant-type monster called Mandragora screamed when pulled from the ground. Their fine roots looked insignificant on the outside, but beneath the surface, the Mandragora absorbed magical energy from underground and even grew into new individuals for reproduction. They were described as a source of life force. That's why purified water made from their fine roots had excellent effects on Manahal regeneration. Giant looked up at the sky with a small smile. He thought to himself that he didn't know things would turn out like this, but it was fortunate that he had raised Mandragoras. He then told Ubeum that he would go get it for him. Hearing that, Ubeum reacted with surprise, asking if Giant would really get it. Giant explained that to make purified water, he needed to find an alchemist, and reminded Ubeum that he couldn't go to the human world because of the spell. He asked Ubeum to instead take care of the kids while he was gone. Nearby on the beach, little Nari was splashing water on the fluffy Guo while shouting "Water attack." Ubeum watched them and said he was in Jen's debt again. But before leaving, Jen asked Ubeum if he had anything to pay the alchemist with, explaining that the alchemist would demand payment. Ubeum lowered his head and admitted that he didn't have money. Before suddenly remembering something, he took out a large bag and placed it on the sand. Jen checked it, and it was filled with many items. He asked Ubeum why there were so many things inside. Ubeum explained that he had packed items hunters always brought when they visited. He asked if that would work. Jen lifted the bag onto his shoulders and told Ubeum that it should be enough. John then took out a teleportation stone from his pocket, and with a smile said that he would be back soon. A few minutes later, the scene shifted to the human world. There John met Bong-soo again. Bong-soo walked down the alley, and John with a large backpack followed him from behind. Bong-soo asked if John was looking for an awakener skilled in alchemy. John nodded and said he needed someone skilled. By this point, Bong-soo had become the exclusive guide. Bong-soo told John to trust him. He explained that the Alchemy Association branch had opened in the slums last year, and if they went there, they could get something. Hearing that, Jen looked confused for a moment. He then asked Bong-soo why he was wearing sandbags on his hands and feet. Bong-soo glanced down and said he was building stamina. He added that he wanted to become strong like Jen, whom he called Big Brother. Jen was surprised hearing that. Bong-soo continued speaking excitedly. He said that Jen must be incredibly strong, someone who entered the demon realm barehanded. He said he wanted to become like that too, so he ate a lot and exercised hard. Hearing that, Jen observed him and thought that Bong-soo did seem a bit taller. Maybe because he was growing. They reached a brick building with a large sign. Bong-soo pointed at it and said, "Here it is." As John looked up at the building, Bong-soo told him that Manager Kim had come recently, and everyone said he was skilled. Bong-soo added that Manager Kim had a good personality. While he was saying that, suddenly the sound of soft whispering filled the air, making Bong-soo lift his head with a confused expression. He blinked and looked to his side as he recognized that voice. He looked there and spotted a man nervously whispering into his phone near the entrance of the alchemy building. Bong-soo pointed toward him and told John that the person they were looking for was over there. The man on the phone spoke in a shaky voice, saying he hadn't been late on interest payments even once in over 20 years. Bong-soo scratched his head as he explained that it looked like another call from a loan shark. John beside him frowned and asked what a loan shark was. Bong-soo sighed and said that using loans was common in this neighborhood. He looked at Manager Kim, who was whispering into the phone trembling, and explained that Manager Kim had originally worked at the Gold City branch for 20 years, but was recently demoted and transferred here. Hearing that, John told Bong-soo that if he was demoted then he must have done something wrong. Bong-soo shook his head and replied that according to what he heard, that wasn't the case. Bong-soo described that back when Manager Kim was in Gold City, one supervisor had been stealing funds meant to support the slums. The supervisor, a sharp-faced man in a suit, was known for doing many bad things, like taking credit for his subordinates' achievements. His name was Director An. Bong-soo said that Manager Kim had reported the wrongdoing. Because of that, he ended up on Director An's bad side and was eventually kicked out. The scene returned to the street, showing the trembling Manager Kim walking alone with exhaustion on his face. When Bong-soo called out to him, Manager Kim turned with surprise and joy, smiling warmly. Manager Kim asked what brought him here. He also noticed that Bong-soo seemed a bit taller. Bong-soo pointed at Jen and explained that his big brother Jen had come, who was looking for an alchemist. Jen thought to himself that high-rank alchemists were rare, and as he looked at Manager Kim, who was releasing a very positive energy, he noted that it was surprising someone like Manager Kim lived in this neighborhood. Manager Kim gently patted Bong-soo on the head, proud that the boy was living earnestly. Seeing how Bong-soo knew Manager Kim, John quietly thought that Bong-soo seemed like a pretty good kid in his words. Bong-soo then stepped back, saying he needed to exercise and would be going. Manager Kim told him to be careful. After Bong-soo left, Manager Kim asked John if they should go inside. Inside the Alchemy Association office, a young man lounged back in a chair with his hands behind his head. He complained that having the wrong boss caused suffering. He said that at best, only D-rank hunters would come to buy low-grade potions, and that there wasn't much performance here. He sighed again, saying that promotion was out of reach in this lifetime. Just then, the office door suddenly opened. That young man quickly straightened up as he heard footsteps. Manager Kim entered with Jen following behind. The young assistant stood up awkwardly and asked if the manager was there. Manager Kim replied calmly, telling Assistant Park to bring something to drink, but Jeo spoke first. He said he didn't have much time, so he would get straight to the point. His expression stayed calm as he looked at Manager Kim. He asked Manager Kim if he was an A+ grade alchemist, and asked if he could make Manhwa purified water using mandragora. He added that he needed 2 bottles. Hearing that, the manager instantly reacted with shock. He muttered to himself that mandragora in the slums made no sense. He also wondered how Joan even knew his alchemist grade. Sweat formed on his face as he tried to stay composed. He said he could make it, but explained that they didn't have such precious materials in this place. Hearing that, Giant then held out something wrapped in white bandages and calmly asked, "Will this work?" Seeing that, Manager Kim's eyes widened in disbelief. He recognized the magical energy coming from it. He shouted that this dense magic was definitely from mandragora fine roots. The younger assistant beside him stepped closer. Both of them stared at the roots glowing in Manager Kim's hands. Manager Kim said the freshness made it feel like it had just been harvested. He said he had never seen mandragora roots in such perfect condition. Jayan then opened his bag and told Manager Kim that he would pay the manufacturing fee with coastal area special products. He told them to appraise everything inside his bag. When the items appeared on the table, black pearls, red moss, and a giant clamshell, both Manager Kim and his assistant froze. Manager Kim asked in shock if Jayan had really gone to the coastal area. The younger assistant said it was impossible. Manager Kim then hugged the 3 glowing black pearls tightly and trembled with joy. He said they were S-grade black pearls, items so rare that even headquarters had never seen them. The assistant shouted that these were Demon Realm giant clams and that they were actually still alive. Just as he said that, the clams shot water on his face. Manager Kim then picked up the red moss and explained it was the core ingredient for high-grade potions. His assistant said this item had only recently been discovered, and it was considered ultra-rare. John asked calmly if all of these were enough for the manufacturing fee. Manager Kim replied that this was enough money to buy an entire building, not just pay a fee. Then the assistant said he needed to go to the lab to bring an appraisal device. Manager Kim agreed, saying appraisal devices were necessary for extremely expensive items. The assistant rushed out, saying he would be back soon. As he was going, Jayan suddenly noticed something. He pointed at a transparent container on the desk. Inside it floated a shriveled root. He said that Manager Kim claimed they had no mandragora, yet this one looked like mandragora. Manager Kim explained that the one in the container was dead, about 10 years old, and had already lost all medicinal effect. He said he originally had an interest in mandragora research, so he kept it. As he spoke, Jane lifted the container holding a fresh mandragora root, and pointed out that this one was alive. Hearing that, Manager Kim got shocked and asked in confusion what Jane meant. Jane looked down at the container in his hand and released some mana around the glass jar. Inside the jar, the small mandragora suddenly twitched. Jane pointed at it and told Manager Kim that this one was alive. He explained that when he gave it mana, it responded. Manager Kim, standing in front of him, screamed in shock, his face turning pale. Jane explained to him that its magical energy had been completely depleted, so it had been barely holding on to life in a comatose state. John looked at the jar again and mumbled that he needed to give it more mana. Shocked, Manager Kim yelled that this couldn't be possible. He insisted that he had already given it plenty of mana as well. Before he could finish, the office door opened behind them. Light shone in as several figures appeared at the entrance. The researcher froze and gasped in surprise. A tall man in a red striped suit stepped inside with 2 female assistants behind him. He smiled sharply and asked Manager Kim how he had been. Manager Kim stuttered, calling him director. The director walked further into the room and looked around with a mocking smile. He commented that, as expected from the slums, the office looked terrible. He added that it did not even look like a loan office. Manager Kim nervously asked what brought him here. The director's eyes moved to the table. He said he had received a tip that amazing items had appeared in the slums. On the table were the rare materials, the giant clamshell, the red moss, and the black pearls. Hearing that, Manager Kim got furious, realizing Assistant Park had contacted Director Ann. Manager Kim nervously said the director had come very quickly. Pointing at the 2 green-haired twins who stood side by side, the director spoke proudly and said that unlike the manager, he had excellent subordinates. He introduced the girls as twin teleportation awakeners. Across from them, Jane was watching all this. The director asked if he was the one who brought those rare items. Jane answered calmly and asked, "So what?" The director then introduced himself as An Ji-jung from the Gold City branch of the Alchemy Association. With a smug expression, he invited Jung to go to Gold City with him, promising to treat him properly. But Jung looked annoyed and thought to himself that he had been having a good conversation with Manager Kim before this interruption. It was very annoying for him. The director clicked his tongue and complained that proper prices couldn't be obtained in a place like this. He then added that if Jane signed an exclusive contract with him, he would cover not only the signing bonus but the taxes too. But Jane pointed at the side of the director's nose and asked if the small bump next to his nose was a wart. The director leaned forward with a sly grin and answered that it was. Hearing that, Giant asked the director about his relationship with someone named Anyopol Diok. The director burst into loud laughter, tilting his head back as he laughed in amusement. Asking if John knew his grandfather, he proudly explained that he was the grandson of a man who once won the Gold Peace Prize. Hearing that, John's lips smiled slightly, and he whispered the name, Anbok Diok. Suddenly, the scene shifted to a dark memory. Young Jeon knelt on a blood-stained floor, surrounded by 2 dead bodies. His small body was bruised and trembling as he held his arm in pain. Someone's voice echoed over the scene, saying, "What terrible genes!" It was Anbok Diok, a cruel-looking scientist in a white coat holding a whip in both hands. His red eyes and twisted smile matched the violent words coming from him. He mocked the children, asking where these creatures who were neither human nor anything else were searching for their mommy. He continued his taunts, saying that now that they were chimeras, maybe they should go to the demon realm to find parents. The whip cracked as he pulled it back and laughed loudly like a demon. He suggested opening a gate and throwing them all into the demon realm. Back in the present, John released a bright blue energy that flashed across the room. The arrogant director in the red-striped suit was thrown backward, as John stood firmly on the floor. The director in the suit fell hard, groaning and trying to lift himself. John looked down at him, asking coldly if he was the same kind of human as his grandfather, who crushed others with power and took anything they wanted whenever they felt greedy. Hearing that, the director stared up in shock, sweating. He stuttered, asking what Jian meant. Jian stepped forward as blue aura swirled around him. He told the director to answer the next question carefully. His eyes glowed as he asked, "TDA Research Institute, is it still there?" The director trembled on the floor, staring up at Chen with shaking hands. He whispered the name TDA, in fear, saying he had never heard that name before. Blue energy circled the room as Chen stood above him, casting a shadow over the director. Chen asked the director if he didn't know the illegal Chimera Research Institute, the same place where An Bok-deok had worked as a senior researcher. Manager Kim, hiding behind a table, looked shocked. Sweat dripped down his face when he heard that the famous Gold Peace Prize winner An Bok-deok had worked in an illegal lab. The director pushed himself up, shouting desperately. He said Chen shouldn't insult the deceased. He trembled as he explained that his grandfather had devoted his whole life to research and to training future generations at the university. He shouted that after retiring, he donated all his fortune to the families of gate victims. For that he received the Gold Peace Prize. But Chen's voice cut through with a cold tone. He said that after killing so many kids in secret, maybe the old man had tried to repent in front of everyone. Chen stood tall over the director. He said he thought the old man would live longer since he was an awakener, but he died sooner than expected. Chen then asked if the old man's death was because of the after effects from falling out of the window. Hearing that, the director's eyes shot open in fear. He gasped, saying that the incident wasn't known to the public. He stuttered and demanded to know how Chen knew. A memory flashed right in front of Chen's eyes. A window shattered, and An Bok-deok fell through the broken window, screaming as he dropped from the building. There, young Chen stood in front of the broken window frame, staring down with empty eyes. In the darkness, his voice echoed one final truth, that he was the one who pushed An Bok-deok. With lifeless eyes, Chen said that An Bok-deok had turned kidnapped children into chimeras and threatened to push those children into gates, so young Chen pushed him instead. Then the scene shifted to the present. Chen stood staring down at the director with cold eyes. He said he would give the director a chance. Chen told him that as soon as he went back, he needed to investigate An Bok-deok and the TDA Research Institute. Chen made a mental note that when the time came, he would go find the director. Chen was feeling very strange because he didn't expect to meet An Bok-deok's grandson here. Chen's memories flashed in his mind. His arm was strapped to a metal table. A tube was inserted into it. He was only 9 years old when he first underwent chimera biological experiments. After that, his monsterization began in his 20s. His memories from that time were blurry. It felt like living in a world where civilization had disappeared. Without self or reason, he probably only followed commands and instincts. Chen stood in the quiet room with his arms crossed, thinking deeply. He muttered to himself that a long time had passed since then. So the Research Institute's name might have changed several times over the years. The door suddenly opened, and Manager Kim rushed in with a big smile. He held 2 glowing green bottles tightly against his chest and cheerfully apologized for making Chen wait. Manager Kim proudly showed the bottles with both hands. The liquid inside shined brightly. He explained that it was purified mana water, made from mandragora. Holding one of the bottles, Chen smiled and said as expected from an A+ grade alchemist, Manager Kim worked fast. He guessed it probably took around 30 minutes. Manager Kim laughed awkwardly and said the materials Chen gave him were very high quality, so the work was simple. Chen nodded, and Manager Kim immediately offered to help settle the remaining materials right away. Chen watched him with a calm expression and thought to himself that Manager Kim seemed skilled and had a good personality too. So Chen made him an offer. He said he would give Manager Kim all the leftover combination materials, and asked if Manager Kim would like to sign a personal contract with him. Chen said he would provide the materials, and Manager Kim only needed to handle the combinations properly. Hearing that, Manager Kim froze in shock. His eyes widened, and he stuttered. He asked if Chen was really giving him all of that, plus an exclusive contract. Chen reminded him that Manager Kim himself had said the product made from these materials could be sold for enough money to buy an entire building. Chen asked calmly, "Wasn't that a good deal?" Hearing that, tears streamed down Manager Kim's eyes. He was shocked and emotional, unable to control himself. Chen, standing in front, looked confused. and asked why he was crying. The manager wiped his tears and slowly said that he was actually from the slums. A memory flashed in his mind. In that memory, loan sharks were yelling inside his childhood home. One man stepped on a long paper while the manager's parents knelt on the floor, begging. The manager explained that when he was a child his parents had taken loans, so he promised he would pay the debt back for them, but no matter how hard he worked his whole life, he stayed in the same place. Tears rolled down his cheeks again as he looked up and asked how he could ever repay such kindness. Hearing that, Chen sighed quietly and thought there was no need to worry about that already. The manager bowed deeply, thanking him again and again. Chen looked at him and thought that from now on there would be many things he needed the manager to do. Then, after getting the purified Manhwa water, Chen came out of the alchemy shop. He looked up to the sky and found that it was already evening. He said he should go back now, thinking surely nothing had happened, but it was Chen's mistake to think that. He should have anticipated Jai going berserk, and it came true. In the dungeon, Jaya held Yubaum off the ground as feathers floated everywhere. Yubaum, pinned under a huge golden claw, looked up with trembling eyes and whispered to his little sister Jai, asking her to please come to her senses. But Jaya's face was already twisted behind a bone mask, her eyes glowing red, and a low growl escaped her mouth. In the next moment, Jai charged forward with a wild scream, throwing Yubaum across the battlefield. Yubaum went flying and hitting the ground with a solid impact, sending rocks flying everywhere. When the dust slowly settled, Yubaum lay weakly on the ground, his head tilted sideways as blood dripped. He thought that it seemed he was too late, but suddenly, two worried faces appeared above him, calling him uncle, and asking if he was okay. Little Nari leaned in with wide, panicked eyes, asking uncle if he was okay, and if it hurt a lot. Beside her was little Guo, who scolded Yubaum angrily, asking what he was thinking just taking hits. Seeing them, a voice rang in Yubaum's head. Badly injured, Yubaum stood up again, as blood dripped from his chest. He lowered his head, and thought silently that he would definitely keep his promise with Chen. Suddenly Yubaum's wings tensed, and his muscles tightened as if he was preparing for something. He said that Chen had already saved them once before, so it was his turn to repay. Immediately, Yubaum and Jai rushed towards each other at full speed. Yubaum took out his claws and rushed forward with all his remaining strength. His glowing eyes were filled with determination. He called out softly, telling his sister Jia that in the next life she should be happy. At that moment Berserk Jia also took out her claws to attack and screamed loudly. Both of them were about to clash violently as their claws and fists were ready with explosive force. But just then, a monster fell from the sky and crashed onto the ground with a solid impact. Yubaum barely managed to dodge the flying monster's crash as Chen was seated above it. It was a huge pink jellyfish-like monster. Yubaum hovered in the sky with a shocked expression. He stared at the giant glowing pink jellyfish below and asked in panic what it was. Chen, who was seated above the jellyfish's head, looked down and wondered if Jai had fainted from just this much force. Below, little Nari spotted him, and shouted happily that it was her uncle. Yubaum trembled in confusion, wondering where that jellyfish came from. Joe, who was crushed under that jellyfish and lay on the ground unconscious, made Yubaum shout loudly, telling Chen that she was his sister, and a girl too. Hearing that, Chen asked Yubaum calmly if there was any other way to stop her without doing this. The Birdman hesitated, covering his face with embarrassment. Then he weakly asked about the medicine. Chen smiled confidently, and took out 2 bright green medicine packs, saying he had gotten them. He told Yubaum to feed one to Jia quickly, adding that one of them was for him. Then sometime later, the night sky glowed faintly, as small sparks drifted through the darkness. A campfire burned brightly on the ground, its flames crackling as fish and skewered food roasted over the fire. Nearby, 2 empty Manhwa water containers lay on the dirt, a bit of green liquid still dripping from their tops. Nearly on a mat, little Nari and Jia slept on the floor, both of them lying flat on their backs. Little Gur also slept beside them, snoring softly. Suddenly, Jia's yellow eyes slowly opened, and just as she opened her eyes, she saw little Nari sleeping in front of her, drooling on the ground with a loud snore. Seeing her, Jia blinked in confusion. She looked around, and wondered, is this a dream? Her mask shifted slightly, as she tried to make sense of her surroundings. Then she noticed something, and stared ahead silently, her expression blank. In front of her, under the quiet starry sky, 2 figures sat on logs beside the campfire. Yubaum sat on one side, and Chen sat on the other, talking. But while they were talking, Chen turned his head slightly when he heard a soft movement nearby. When Jai saw him, she jumped back in fear, covering herself tightly as she screamed, asking who he was. Her whole body trembled in panic. Hearing the commotion, little Nari also woke up. While rubbing her sleepy eyes, she slowly sat up and in a soft, tired voice, asked if the sparrow ant had woken up. Hearing little Nari, Jai froze in shock, wondering if Nari was calling her sparrow aunt. From ahead, Ubiome called out, "You woke up, Jai." He didn't turn his head. He just spoke calmly and told her to check her mana hall once. Hearing those words, Jai stiffened. Her voice shook as she repeated, "Mana hall." She lifted her hand, touching the bright blue light glowing inside her chest. Her eyes widened as she whispered that it was normal. She then hurriedly touched the mask covering her face. With trembling fingers, she held the skull mask and muttered in disbelief that her face had come back too. Shocked, Jaya shot up and asked her brother what had happened and wanted to know who all these people were. Ubiome pointed at Chen sitting by the fire and asked Jaya if she didn't know who he was. Ubiome reminded her that she had even sung about wanting to see this person again. She froze and whispered to herself, wondering if it had really been that long. Her eyes widened in shock as she stared at Chen. She stuttered and asked if it could really be him. She looked at Chen, who was eating roasted food on a stick. A faint image of a younger Chen appeared in Jila's memory, as she muttered Chen's name. Number 17. Jaya rushed behind Ubiome, grabbing his shoulder in disbelief. She asked again if it was really number 17. Ubiome nodded, and said she was right. Jaya looked toward Chen as her brother spoke again. He said that this time as well, Chen had saved them. While they were emotional, suddenly Chen turned and asked them if there was any more red moss. Ubiome replied that they had used all of it for today. Jaya lowered her head slightly, and whispered that it truly was number 17, saying he still had zero empathy. Jyothra then gently held her bone mask with both hands and slowly lifted it, revealing her face. She smiled brightly and thanked Chen for saving them. Under the starry sky, the sea behind Jia shined very brightly. Little Nari looked up at the sea and tilted her head. With wide golden eyes, she asked what that was. Bright sparkles appeared far out on the dark sea. She ran closer to the shore, staring at the glowing waves. She pointed at the light and shouted that something was sparkling in the sea. Jael walked over and, while looking toward the glowing water, told little Nari that it was a sea fairy. Then she covered her face with her mask, saying it was embarrassing to come out after so long. Hearing the words sea fairy, little Nari got surprised. Golden seahorse-shaped creatures floated on the water, glowing brightly. Jai pointed at them and explained that it was originally a seahorse monster that lived in the deep sea, but they gave it that nickname because it looked just like a fairy while playing. As the glowing seahorses danced and shimmered across the sea surface, Jael told the amazed little Nari that at night, these seahorses came up to the surface to play. The little girl's eyes sparkled as she whispered in awe. Jael continued and told little Nari that when the sun rises, they go back home, but if they follow the sea fairy then, they can see yellow glowing quartz. When Chen heard quartz, he suddenly remembered something. He admitted he had forgotten his original purpose. He then asked Ubiome how much time was left until sunrise. Ubiome blinked and answered with uncertainty, "Pretty soon." Hearing that, Chen looked up at the starry sea with a faint smile. A cool breeze blew across his face as he said that he would be swimming in the sea after a long time. Meanwhile, outside the dungeon, inside the meeting room, the same old man from little Nari's memories, with long white hair and glasses, sat at the head of the table. His hands were folded in front of his face as he looked forward with a serious expression. He asked in a calm but heavy voice about the whereabouts of the mechanical creature. The researchers standing around the long table explained the situation. They said that about 10 B-rank hunters had spotted the creature several times in the forest, but none of them managed to catch it. They added that it now seemed to be hiding somewhere in the coastal area. Hearing this, the old man was surprised that it had moved to the coast. The report continued. They said that recently, even A-rank hunters who went to the coastal area returned with memory loss. The hunters' faces looked blank and shocked in the scene. The researchers added that although the hunters lost their memories, the creature's location information was still recorded on their tracking devices. While they were talking, suddenly the old man's phone on the table began to vibrate. The screen lit up, showing the name Director A, calling. The old man looked at the phone in surprise. He picked up Director A's call, saying it had been a while. Director A replied in a steady tone that yes, it had indeed been a while, and said he had something to ask. He asked the old man if he happened to know anything about the TDA Research Institute. That's all for today, everyone. Before we wrap up, I want to let you know that we've recently launched a membership program here, where you can enjoy perks like early access to videos and soon, exclusive content just for members. You'll also receive custom badges and emojis to enhance your interactions. If you're interested, consider joining our membership to enjoy these benefits. Check out the link in the description to join. See you all in the next video.